Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the DN WhatIf, with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Deku Found a Cosmic Power to Protect and Save. All credits for this video go to their respective authors, so please support the real author. Check out the link in the description for more details, and go to the story link to say hi to the author. Please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now, let's get into the fanfic. Chapter 1. Shooting Star. Sorry kid, it ain't gonna happen. That single sentence was all it took to destroy the dreams of a boy. Dreams of being a hero that saved people and protected the weak, no matter the odds. The same kind of hero that always did with a smile on his face. All Might. As young as the boy was, he clearly recalled that before seeing the symbol of peace and justice appear on the scene. His dreams were as scattered about as there were stars above him in the night sky. Only when he saw the towering hero and his smile, and how effortlessly he saved people, did the boy's dream come into focus, and the vision of him being the same kind of hero appear in his mind. In a world where virtually everyone born was guaranteed to have some kind of superpower or meta ability, the only real concern that the boy had was how long he would have to wait before he could start on the road to fulfilling his dream. Izuku Midoriya, a boy whose mother could use a form of telekinesis and whose father could breathe fire, imagined he would inherit either one or get some form of combination from both. That thought was all he had in his mind the day his mother took him to see a doctor for both a health checkup and quirk evaluation. Then the doctor told him that all the test results came back with one conclusion: that despite having parents who were third-generation quirk users, Izuku Midoriya proved to be the exception of the rule of the world, was born quirkless. Even the boy knew that the odds of someone being born quirkless was low, even if one parent had only one quirk, and it was next to impossible that two quirk parents would bear a quirkless child. And yet, somehow or other, the doctor told him that he was the exception. Hearing that sentence caused the whole world in Izuku's mind to simply shatter. He was aware that the doctor and his mother were still talking, but he didn't hear a single sentence, or even a word that said it might be possible for the child to be born with a quirk later on. His mind couldn't handle the information that he was given. So much so that he didn't realize that they had gotten home until, and that his mother had allowed him to use the computer. It was something of an automatic motion on his part, that Izuku typed in the commands to pull up the video that he had no doubt seen more than 100,000 times. The video of All Might making his debut, and saying a line that became synonymous with his title, as the symbol of peace and justice. "Fear not, citizens, for hope has arrived. Because I am here." Izuku wasn't sure how many more times he watched it, but eventually his mind started to register reality again. Enough to where he noticed that his mom had been keeping a watch on him from the door. He wasn't sure why, but couldn't help himself and ask his mom a question that he would later hate having said at all. "See that, Mom? There's always a smile on his face, no matter how bad things get. Even when things seem impossible, he never gives up." Izuku turned to his mom, tears falling freely from his eyes. His gaze locked with his mom's. "Do you think I can be a hero too?" Being asked that one question was too much for Izuku's mom to handle. She did the only thing she believed she could do for her son. She walked over to him, gave him a hug, and even shed tears herself. "I'm sorry, Izuku. I wish things were different." For a caring mother, it was about all she could do for her son. But for Izuku, it was the final nail that would be the coffin for his dream. Izuku had hoped against all that maybe there was one chance, however slim, that he could still be a hero, and that his mother still believed in his dream as well. But when his mother said that to him, something that was meant to be comforting, it was to Izuku the same as pouring salt on an open wound. The rest of the night passed by in silence. The day's events left Izuku more exhausted than he had ever felt before, and even more confused on what he would do now with his dreams all but shattered and destroyed. Izuku wasn't sure why, but he felt like he needed to look out his window. Maybe it was because somewhere in the back of his mind, he remembered an old legend about how one can make a wish while looking up to the sky. Something about how if you recite a poem as you stare at the stars, your heart's desire may come true. Even for a child as young as he was, Izuku knew without question there was only one desire within his heart. Pulling back the curtain on the window and looking out at the night sky, Izuku was glad that he was able to see some stars. The city lights tended to be too much, and most stars weren't easily seen even on a clear night. It took a moment for Izuku to remember the words to the poem. He put his hands together and recited them in his head, while staring up at one particular single dot of light in the sky. "Starlight, star bright, first star I see tonight. I wish I may, I wish I might. Have this wish I wish tonight." It took a moment after reciting the poem did Izuku say the words he felt in his heart. I wish to be a hero. One that protect the weak. One that inspires to be like All Might. For a brief moment, it seemed like everything paused in the world. Izuku felt as if his wish was heard, and in a way gave him hope for his dream again. His eyes were still locked onto the one star that he made his wish to, as if he dared not to even blink once the entire time. But after that moment passed and the world seemed to continue on, did Izuku blink, and felt his heart sink again. It almost felt like whatever gods were above had taken his wish into consideration and rejected it. Izuku let himself blink after that thought entered into his mind. Mostly to keep his eyes from drying, but also to keep the tears from appearing as well. After he brought up his hands to wipe away the tears from his eyes, Izuku noticed something about the star that he made his wish upon. He wasn't sure at first since he was looking through the glass window. But after he opened his window so he would have a clear view, Izuku noticed that the star had indeed changed colors, if only just. It was no longer white, but seemed to be a mixture of red and blue. Seeing the color changes, and then realized that said star was moving from where he had first seen it. The young boy made the only logical connection he could in his mind. He was seeing a shooting star. Izuku continued on this path of thinking, and came to the conclusion that maybe his wish was heard somewhat, and something was giving him a chance to make the wish again loud and clear. This brought a smile to the boy's face and renewed sense of energy. Not wanting to miss what he felt was a once-in-a-lifetime chance, Izuku stuck his head out of the window and yelled out the only words he knew mattered to him. I wish to be a hero. The smile on his face didn't leave the entire time his eyes were locked on to the falling star. His little heart was pounding so much in his chest that the excitement welling up within him almost made him want to jump out the window to catch the falling star. But as quickly as the excitement built up within him, there was a hint of confusion. His mind began to realize that how the star was falling. It took several moments of watching it fall for Izuku to make the connection of where it was going to fall. There was a small forest that he and his friend Katsuki Bakugo played in from time to time. Izuku watched as the star continued to fall and land in an area that he knew well enough. Izuku wanted to rush out and head to the forest to see the star that fell from the sky. He might have done so if it meant dragging his mom out of bed to do so. But when he ran out of his bedroom and go to his mom's room, his hand immediately stopped from grabbing the doorknob because of what he could faintly hear coming from the other side of the door. It was barely audible, but it was clear enough for the boy's ears. His mother was still crying. Izuku felt his heart both calm and then sink when he recognized that his mother was still crying. Probably over the question he had asked of her, and how it seemed she knew her answer didn't do anything that could be deemed positive, or at least positive enough. His desire to head out into the forest quickly died at that moment. Izuku had already asked something of his mother, and it seemed to be hard to deal with afterwards. Even for a boy, he knew just enough that it wouldn't be right of him to ask anything more of her this night. But his curiosity for wanting to find out what fell into the nearby forest was just strong enough to be present in his mind. Especially come the following morning. The mother and the son had seen the doctor on Saturday, and with today being Sunday, that meant he could at least convince her to just go for a casual stroll into the woods and coincidentally end up in an area of the forest that was ever present in his mind. With the weather being rather nice for the time of the year, Izuku managed to convince his mother that he wanted to take a walk into the forest, and he wanted her to come along with him. He said that maybe they just needed to get away from everything, forget what happened yesterday, and just move forward with today. To Izuku's mother, Inko, it felt like her son was doing something more mature for his age in response to having his dream being so harshly taken away from him. Maybe she was reading too much into it. Maybe her son was somehow bouncing back better than she expected. Whatever the case may be with Izuku, Inko agreed that maybe taking a walk into the woods for a Sunday activity might be just what they both needed. It was around 10 m when the mothers and duo started their leisurely stroll into the nearby woods. Izuku said that they should just pick a direction and walk until they either reached the other side of the forest or when they got hungry for lunch. Saying the last part with a smile on his face did give some positive feelings within Inko, but also a hint of negative ones as well. There was a part of her that felt that maybe her son was in some kind of denial of what the doctor had told them and was trying to continue on as if nothing had actually changed for him. That his dream of becoming a hero like All Might was still within his grasp as it was before. Inko also felt that maybe there was something else behind the reason why Izuku wanted to do this. Something that was so out of the blue for him might have an actual reason in the end. If that thought hadn't occurred to her, then Inko felt like she would have probably ignored her son's request. A decision she would later be thankful that she never made. The two of them walked hand in hand in silence. A part of Inko grew more worried with each step, since she half expected her son to be chatting up a storm about the things he had often found in the forest. Even as his mother, Ain't could tell there was a serious expression on Izuku's face that she hadn't really seen before. Izuku wasn't the kind of child that was determined to do anything with all he had. That was something she had seen in his friend Katsuki Bakugo. Even the boy's mother Mitsuki Bakugo had told Inko that when it came to almost anything, her son would always show a determined expression before actually doing it. Inko considered for a moment that Izuku was probably starting to pick up some traits from his friend, and felt a sense of relief that maybe Izuku was becoming determined not to let his new revealed quirkless status hold him back. That did bring something of a smile to her face in regards to her son. Izuku, for his reasons of being quiet, was trying to remember exactly where in the forest that he saw the Starland. He knew they were walking in the general direction, but so far, he hadn't seen anything that seemed out of the ordinary. The pair continued to walk for what felt like an hour. Mostly since Izuku's stomach decided to remind both he and Inko that it was getting close to lunchtime, and despite having eaten breakfast, his stomach was a little more on the empty side since he didn't eat anything else yesterday. Inko let out a quiet laugh at the roar of Izuku's stomach, to which he himself even smiled at as well. Before Inko could make the suggestion that it was probably time for them to head back, Izuku stopped in his tracks after noticing something that was really out of place. Inko was curious at what made her son stop and looked in the direction that he himself was looking at and noticed the same scene. There was a tree that looked like it had been split right down the middle. Izuku was the first to run up to it and get a closer look at it. Inko caught up to her son and was wondering why he was interested in a tree in this state. Even Inko knew forest would have a tree that was either too weak or old or any other natural reason, and would eventually just fall apart. But upon closer inspection, Inko noticed that the state of the tree didn't hint at anything natural, like it had been cut in half by something bigger than the tree itself. Not only that, but there seemed to be burn marks visible on the tree, like those areas had only lightly caught fire, but not enough to spread and set the whole tree itself on fire. That thought was enough to send a kind of warning in her mind. It's true that there wasn't much of a worry about a villain running around in the area. It was something she never had a doubt in her mind, and was sure even Izuku had as well. But what happened yesterday made her consider things she normally never did considered in the slightest. Her mind went to what is probably the worst-case scenario, which in turn made her want to take her son out of the forest as quickly as possible. However, she didn't move fast enough, for her son had already dashed away from her. When she called out for her son to stop running, Inko did notice what was probably the cause for Izuku's movement. There was another tree that looked damaged. A rather large branch seemed to have been cut off. After that tree was another tree that was laying on its side, like the trunk of the tree had been snapped as easily as one would do with a twig. Following her son's movement led Inko's eyes to see what happened behind the last tree. It looked to be some kind of random boulder that was taller than her son, but it was cut clearly in two. When Inko chased after her son, her mind made the connection between the trees and the boulder. Something had either flew or fallen at such a high rate of speed that it crashed through several solid objects before it seemed to bury itself halfway into the ground. As soon as she reached the same spot that her son had run to moment before, Inko took in the surrounding area, which helped confirm the theory that something impacted into the ground, and its angle of flight was a straight line through the trees and boulder. What happened here? Inko said mostly to herself before focusing her attention on her son and the object. Her son was already looking at the object with wide eyes, which somewhat confused Inko. Her initial judge of the object before her looked to be like some kind of silver circular object. She wasn't sure what it was that was on said object, but it seemed to her like they were a pair of straps or buckles. Though she was slightly confused at the sight, Inko did have the idea that maybe this was the reason why her son brought her out here in the first place. She decided to ask her son if that was the reason when she walked over to him. But as she had walked around to see that other side of the object, Inko now had a better understanding why Izuku was staring at it with such wide eyes. The object, even though it was still half buried into the ground, had a very distinct and maybe even recognizable design on this side of it. Red and blue circular stripes, and what appeared to be a star in the middle of it. The first thought Inko had at the sight was similar to what Izuku was having at the same time. Whatever this was, there was strong possibility in the mind of a young boy that it once belonged the world's greatest hero. Only Inko considered that idea as a stretch, but she knew her son was probably making the connections in his mind. What she was also thinking about was how did something like this get all the way out here in the middle of the forest? There hadn't been reports of villains attacking the area yesterday, and before they went to the doctor for Izuku's examination, the radio had reported that All Might was virtually on the other side of Japan, fighting off several villains that were trying to destroy a seaport for some unspecified reason. It was possible that maybe All Might threw it in that fight so hard that it landed here as a result. Except that theory only worked had All Might started using this item. Even if it was only recently, or just a one-time deal, Inko knew her son Izuku would have said something about it before now. About how All Might changed his costume, or is using something else when fighting off villains. Inko wasn't as well versed in what all the pro heroes looked like, but she was more than sure that not many other pro heroes had a color scheme or overall costume designs that would make one think of All Might first before someone else. Despite All Might being the one hero, Inko knew enough that all other pro heroes tried to distinguish themselves from everyone else at least. With that in mind, Inko came to the question that was bothering her left and right at the moment. A question that might have been more confusing had she known what her son was thinking at that moment. Izuku had seen enough pro heroes and their equipment to recognize something almost on first glance. This was clearly a shield, and what fell from the skies last night. The young boy's mind was running through all the thoughts that he had within the last 24 hours. How he had been told he was born without a quirk. How he had asked his mom if he could still be a hero. How he had made a wish for his dream, and even yelled it out into the night. One side of him were saying how this was a coincidence and nothing more. That it was just pure chance that he saw this fall from the sky, and that landed near him, and no one else was aware of it since no one else found it before he did. The other side of him said to him that this was proof that he was to be the next one hero like All Might. That only he was meant for this shield. That same side of him even used the old fantasy story he once heard about the sword in the stone, and how a mere nobody managed to pull it free, and would later become a king with the sword in hand. This wasn't a sword, but a shield, and a shield is always meant to protect. Izuku did feel like he had a choice at that moment. A choice that if he took the shield, it would mark his first true steps towards his dream of becoming a hero. But he also knew that if he chose not to take the shield, it was the same as accepting the defeat he was handed by the doctor about not having a quirk. As much as he didn't like to admit what his mother had said to him after he had asked her if he could still be a hero, how she wished things were different, it did spark another thought in his mind. This shield in front of him was not just a wish from one person, but from two. That was all Izuku needed in both his young heart and mind to make what he knew would be the most fateful decision he could ever make. Before Inko could ask her son any kind of question about the situation, Izuku had quickly moved to the shield and grabbed onto it as best as he could with his small hands. He was aware that he wasn't all that strong, and that the object that was before him probably weighed more than he did times 10. But that wasn't going to stop him in the slightest. In that moment, when both hands were on opposite sides of the object, Izuku used all of his strength to pull it out of the ground. Inko saw what her son was doing. She saw clearly that her little boy was doing all he could to pull the shield out of the ground. Inko was actually torn when she realized why her son was using everything he had to pull the object that was half buried out of the ground. She had seen her son be this determined for something once before, and strangely enough it involved All Might merchandise. If she remembered correctly, then it was when there was a poster that marked the 10th anniversary of All Might, and it was also never put on sale to the public. That part never really made sense to her, why they would advertise a piece of merchandise and yet never put on sale. Even if it was a limited edition kind of merchandise, Inko wondered why do such a thing that was clearly counterproductive at its core, with something that would no doubt be popular with the public. However, that didn't stop her son from searching as far as he could to see if he could obtain one. Every store that sold anything remotely connected to All Might that was within walking distance of their home was a place Izuku went to. There were times Inko had scolded her son, probably too many times if she was honest, when he did his search without her, or even his friend to accompany him. Maybe it wasn't unusual for a child to wander off, but that was only because of an inattentive person like a babysitter or parent. Not a child needing to find a copy of a poster of his idol. That actually made a new thought appear in her mind. There was no way she could forget that when they returned from the examination that her son watched the same All Might video that she knew without question inspired him. She realized that she had hoped maybe seeing that video after getting the earth-shattering news that her son's spirit would begin to mend. Seeing how the doctor so casually destroyed it without a hint of empathy, especially towards a child, it felt like to her that he wanted to be cruel in that moment towards her son. Inko knew that maybe she was banking on some kind of false hope, or this was the world's biggest shot in the dark there would ever be. But she stopped herself from doing what a mother would instinctually do and watched as her son continued to use all the strength his small body had to pull the object free. She had thought about helping for a moment. The use of her own quirk would make it somewhat easy for her to lift the object out of the ground. It didn't seem that heavy to her, and it didn't look like it was made of any heavy metal. But she squashed that thought the moment it entered into her mind. Her son was trying to do something with his entire heart and soul at this very moment. Everything he had within him. Inko knew his son wouldn't have noticed her using her levitation quirk to allow the object to move even a little bit, since his determined expression clearly said he was focused on nothing else but the task at hand. So she did what she felt was a better choice in this moment. She gave her son motherly encouragement. "You can do it, Izuku." Inko wanted to shout it, but that part of her that was still worried this would be nothing but a wasted effort kept her volume in check. Izuku, whether he heard his mother or not, didn't respond, but let out grunts of exertion that actually got louder each time he tried to pull the object out of the ground. He felt himself losing strength with each attempt and had to stop for a moment to catch his breath. Izuku took a step back and had to brace himself from falling over from the expenditure of his strength by placing his hands on the top of his knees after bending his forward. There was actual beads of sweat on his face as he took in breath after breath of air to refill his lungs. In the time he took to catch his breath, that Izuku felt something appear in his heart. That he had one chance left, and if he didn't give it everything he had, then it truly meant his dream was dead. He looked at the shield one last time and made a vow in his heart that he would put everything he had in this task. With his determination steeled as much as he could, and his body prepped with as much strength he was able to regain from catching his breath, Izuku put his hands back on opposite side of the shield as he could reach and planted both of his feet as best as he could. Before he started, Izuku heard his mother say again what she had said earlier. "You can do this, Izuku. You can." Hearing that seemed to give Izuku a little strength he didn't know he had left. Maybe it was because this time it was what he needed to hear, and his mother said it to him. Izuku made sure his grip was as strong as they could be with his small hands before he put his entire being into freeing the shield from the ground. Inko, for her part, could only watch as her son with a hint of worry that the boy might not be strong enough to complete this task. She again even considered using her quirk to help her son, and with each passing second did it become a stronger and burning thought in her mind. Inko didn't know how much time had passed, but it felt like an eternity seeing her son being unable to free the object. She even felt herself struggling to both raise one hand to help her son and her other hand to keep herself from doing so. It reached a breaking point where she couldn't hold herself back and raised a hand to help her son. Whether she activated her quirk in that instant or not didn't matter to her as she saw the shield begin to move upwards. It was small and almost unnoticeable, but she saw it had actually been raised upwards, and her son hadn't stopped yet. "It's working, Izuku. You're doing it. You're doing it." Inko began to cheer for her son when her eyes told her again that the object was slowly and surely being freed from the ground. Izuku felt like his heart was going to explode out of his chest. His arms and hands felt like they were on fire as well, but it didn't stop him at all. He did hear his mother begin to cheer for him, which only pushed him even further into his efforts. The instant his sense of touch alerted him to the fact that the shield actually moved increased Izuku's drive past limits he didn't know he had. Though the forest was quiet save for Inko's cheering shouts for her son. When the sound similar to a metallic ring occurred, it was as if the entire world went quiet in that moment. Izuku Midoriya freed the shield from the ground with his bare hands. It was such overwhelming joyful moment for the boy that he didn't realize that in efforts to free the shield, he had done so in a manner that left him off balance and caused him to fall flat on his back, with the shield landing on top of him. "Izuku!" Inko shouted at the sight of her boy falling back, and something quite possibly heavy landing on top of him. That was when she used her quirk to lift the shield off of her son and rushed over to him to see if he was injured. Like a worried mother, Inko checked for anything and everything on her boy. She didn't know if he got a simple cut or broke some bones or even a concussion. In her mind, she was expecting the absolute worst. Well, not the absolute worst, since the doctor had in a way already done that to her boy. But what she saw definitely confused her. The look on Izuku's face wasn't one of pain, but a kind of confusion that seemed to mirror Inko's own. "Izuku, are you okay? Are you hurt anywhere?" Inko asked, her voice filled with great worry. Izuku didn't say anything at first. He looked up at the sky for a moment before turning his head to face his mother. "Mom, did you use your quirk to help me?" Inko's expression became like the thief who, though they were being sneaky, but had been caught with their hands in the cash register. But she calmed herself since she knew that the usage of her quirk was for a completely justified reason. Only to get it off of you. When it landed on top of you, I thought maybe it might be too heavy for you, or it might smother you, or... Inko was listing off all the reasons her mother's side could think of after seeing the shield fall onto her son. But, did you use your quirk when I was trying to pull it out of the ground? Inko's expression showed she was more genuinely confused than possibly guilty. She did think about telling her son that she had considered it, but her mind stopped in mid-thought. And that was because she didn't acknowledge something that she always noticed when she uses her quirk. Her quirk allows her to levitate small objects, and with given enough will within her, she could move something that might be a little heavy. But it wasn't like she was able to lift the sofa in their home with any ease, and every time she used her quirk, Inko would get a sense as to how heavy the object was to her. In short, if she lifted a tea bag or dinner plate with her quirk, it would feel to her that she was lifting something as heavy as any tea bag or dinner plate. She looked back at the shield that was laying just a meter away from her and her son, and realized that even in the heat of the moment, when she used her quirk to move it off of her son, it felt like she had up something that was no heavier than a full garbage bag they throw out or the microwave they have in the kitchen. While on the surface that may not be something worth noting, it was different for Inko since neither a full trash bag or a microwave could crash through several trees and a boulder and remain in one piece. Even to her eyes that Inko saw, there was no kind of visible warping, cracks, or even chips along the surface. Now that it was free from the ground, did Inko get a better idea as to how big it was, and was almost a meter-sized circular shape. There was no doubt in her mind that what that shield was made of was easily stronger than anything she had ever heard of. And she was relatively positive that there was no metal in the world could be so strong and be so light. So, Mom? Did you use your quirk? Izuku asked him more in an earnest tone of voice. Looking between her boy and the shield several times, Inko was having a little trouble accepting the facts she had just made in her mind. The only fact she did accept was the answer she could give to her son. The only time I used my quirk was to get the shield off of you. I haven't used it for anything else today. Inko could see the gears turning her son's head. She was fairly sure that Izuku was making the same conclusions that she had about the shield. When he freed the shield from the ground, Izuku realized after the moment of his triumph that the object wasn't as heavy as he expected it to be. He did indeed make the same conclusions as his mother did, about how the shield had to be made out of a material that was far stronger than anything else, and how most metals that could survive intact after smashing through trees and a boulder had to be heavier than a little boy like himself would be capable of lifting. He knew that his mom's quirk could lift things within a certain weight category. So, since she was able to lift the shield off of him without any significant strain on her part, and he did believe her when she said she didn't help him when he freed it from the ground, Izuku's mind was able to draw a conclusion to what he knew at the moment. Said conclusion was reinforced by the fact he had seen the shield fall from the sky the night before. He remembered in class that one of the teachers told him that if something falls from space and crashes onto Earth, it looks like it's on fire the entire way. Getting up from his spot on the forest floor, Izuku walked over to the shield and picked it up. It was still heavy for him, but again, it wasn't as heavy as he had expected it to be in the beginning. Turning to his mom with the shield in both hands, Izuku gave her the biggest genuine smile he had. A smile that Inko was sure she might never see again, but was glad to be wrong. But she wasn't wrong in what she knew his son was going to say after giving her said smile. Can I keep it? Chapter 2. Even when shackled, the heart still beats. As a child begins to grow and learn more about the world, the first rule a child will learn that there will be times that the world can be unforgiving, no matter how young or old you are. It wasn't long after the doctor visit that Izuku Midoriya's status of being quirkless. He didn't say anything the following school day after the doctor's examination, but eventually the rest of his classmates learned this fact about him. The credit of the word being spread around the school was directed towards Katsuki Bakugo. Izuku did wonder why his friend would be so loud about it, like it was the kind of news that needed to be spread the way Bakugo did so. But that thought was forgotten and replaced by a different one on the day Izuku saw Bakugo, and what could be considered his closest classmate follows attacking another child to the point where the child actually started to cry. Izuku asked Bakugo why he was being so mean to another child. Izuku wasn't sure what happened that led things to becoming a 3-on-1 fight, but he knew it still wasn't right. Izuku even knew that the look on Bakugo's face clearly said he wasn't done yet, which made Izuku instinctively react to the situation. He told his friend with the flashy explosive quirk that if he didn't stop hurting the one that was behind him, then he would stop Bakugo himself. His body was shaking since he knew he did just challenge someone he considered a friend still, and it was clear it would end up being himself against 3 others and their quirks. So, Deku the quirkless wonder thinks he can play hero, huh? Hearing that from his friend Bakugo, or as he used to call him, Kakin, before he and the other 2 rushed forward at him was more painful than the actually blows that were landed on him. At least, on an emotional level. Even when the boy who had the quirk to make his fingers grow in length to hold Izuku's head in place, while Bakugo delivered a right hook across his face, the words rang more in his ears than the actually ringing said punch caused. Izuku wasn't sure how long he was on his back, staring up at the blue sky after Bakugo and the other 2 traded blows with him. Or rather, used him as a punching bag target practice. The hits to the head did cause his vision to blur, but when it returned did Izuku try to understand why the situation unfolded the way it did. Without question did Izuku knew that Bakugo wanted to be a hero like All Might. Both of them worshipped the legendary hero to the point where he heard their parents thought it was some kind of religious fixation, whatever that meant. With that being the case, Izuku knew that the only time All Might ever attacked, or even threw a punch, was because someone was in danger by a villain. And Izuku also knew that whenever a villain who thought they could defeat All Might were defeated, did All Might stop and make sure that everyone in the immediate area wasn't in danger or hurt. Whatever the reason was, Izuku could see that even if Bakugo worshipped All Might, he certainly wasn't acting like All Might, or even someone that would be called a hero. That moment left a lot of things for Izuku to think over as he made his way back home. The boy was so lost in his thoughts that he didn't think about what to tell his mother about the reason for the state he was in, since his face was now showing a significant bruise where Bakugo had punched him. Not to mention that his shirt was ripped a bit around the collar when Bakugo grabbed the front of it with one hand so he could punch Izuku with the other. Izuku didn't like lying to his mother. Mostly because he was a terrible liar, and somehow she seemed to already know the truth before asking the question itself. He did his best to reassure his mother by saying that Bakugo played a little too roughly on accident today. Whether she believed his words or now, Inko didn't press the matter anymore, which was something of a relief to him. When he was told that dinner would be ready in an hour, Izuku returned to his room to change his shirt and address the bruise on his face. There was a mirror he had in his room that was on top of his small dresser, which he used to examine the purple area on the left side of his face. He noticed that it seemed there was a little bit of blood on the edge of his mouth as well, but nothing too serious overall. When he lightly touched the bruise, Izuku did wince at the sudden flare-up of pain and retracted his head quickly in response. After taking full stock of his current situation, Izuku stared into his own reflection with eyes that were on the verge of shedding tears. He was still hearing Bakugo calling him Deku the quirkless wonder, as if it was on repeat. The only thing that kept the tears from forming and falling freely was something that his vision noticed in the mirror's reflection. It was enough to stop the tears and to get Izuku to turn his head to look at what got his attention. The shield and its red, white, and blue striped color scheme with a 5-point star in the middle. Izuku walked over to it and placed a hand on it in an almost instinctual manner. Not because he saw it as some kind of symbol that a boy might see as a kind of security to help handle the unknowns of the world, but because he wanted to remember that what he found in the forest was something that was without any question or doubt was special. At first glance, there was nothing special about it. Even he knew that if anyone saw it would assume it was related to All Might just because of how it seemed to inspire such an image. But he also knew and checked as much as he could that All Might never had anything remotely resembling this shield. A cape definitely, but nothing else that Izuku could remember about All Might and his previous costumes. The boy was still puzzled by a lot of things about this shield. The first and foremost being that it wasn't as heavy as it looked. Izuku may have some problems moving a full bag of trash because of his small frame, and this shield felt about the same weight in comparison. Even his mother said that it felt like around 10 to 12 pounds in her hands. She even used her quirk on it, and said it was actually surprising to her of the amount of effort, or rather lack thereof, she had to put into lifting it. Inko voiced the idea that maybe it was some kind of new frisbee that might be used in the UA High Sports Festival, and someone threw it by accident, and that's why it landed all the way out in the forest in their town. Even Izuku agreed to that idea since he had seen several sports festival events posted onto the internet that showed every year the high school did something different in competitions. It was because of that idea that Inko put up a couple of flyers around the neighborhood and a post online about having found something in the forest and was wondering if it belonged to someone. Izuku was somewhat sad at the idea that maybe it did belong to someone, but was glad that Inko said they would give 3 weeks of time, and if no one came to claim it, then Izuku could keep it. It was kind of a shameful feeling to have, hoping someone wouldn't show up to their home and claim the shield, but Izuku knew it was only fair to do what his mother did. Until that time, Izuku still looked at the shield, as a symbol that his dream still had a chance to live. Picking up the shield with both hands, and still being amazed about its weight, Izuku lifted it up over his head as best as he could. He wasn't sure why he was doing it, but somehow or other it felt like a kind of reminder to himself that even a boy can do things no one else might think possible. That thought did bring a smile to his bruised face, and take his attention away from his surroundings, since his eyes were focused upwards. When he took a step forward, Izuku had forgotten that when he took off his torn shirt to replace it that he had left it on the floor. The moment his foot landed on the shirt did Izuku lose traction and fall backwards. Reflexively to the situation, Izuku flew backwards to try and catch himself from falling completely to the floor, and that meant throwing the shield out of his grip. While Izuku failed to stop himself from landing on the floor with an audible thud, he didn't fail to see what happened. It may have been brief, but he saw the shield that he threw behind him as he fell backwards. It bounced off the wall with a metallic sound. And then it flew forward and bounced off the opposite wall, and then flew back at the first wall it bounced off of before falling to the floor just shy of hitting the opposite wall again. The commotion that Izuku made in his room easily got the attention of Inko, who burst into his room with the look of pure panic on her face. "What happened in here, Izuku?" Inko looked around the room, trying to see what caused multiple sounds that made her think someone was trying to bash in the wall of her son's room. Izuku looked at his mother and the shield a couple of times before coming up with reply that was the honest truth of it all. "I, fell. I had the shield in my hands and I fell and threw it at the same time," Izuku replied while pointing at the shield on the floor. The response coming from his mouth was rather sheepishly, but it was also the truth, so it didn't feel like Izuku was lying to his mother. He wasn't worried if he was going to get in trouble for making such a noisy racket. He was more worried that his mother might take the shield away from him, because she might now consider it too dangerous to be in his hands. Inko looked at both her son and the shield and noticed also on the floor the ruined shirt that Izuku had worn earlier. She knew her son sometimes had the habit of leaving the clothes on floor, and was somewhat improving on picking up after himself in his room. It was fortunate for Izuku that in Inko's mind that she envisioned what her son said playing out like it did. She had seen him many times before with an All Might action figure in his hand, running around in his room pretending or imagining that All Might himself was flying in his room or himself as All Might flying in his room. Satisfied with the answer she was given, Inko only gave a somewhat stern order for her son to always pick up after himself if and when he was going to run around the room, and reminded him to finish cleaning himself before dinner was ready. Izuku nodded his head in reply and got up from his spot on the floor to put the shirt it belonged. Whether it could be repaired or thrown away was Inko's final decision, but Izuku still threw it in the clothes hamper as he was told. After seeing that did Inko leave Izuku's room to continue finish making dinner. When Izuku was sure his mother's attention was no longer focused on him, did he look back at the shield. In his mind, he replayed over and over what he had seen. Izuku was trying to understand what he saw, to see if it was some kind of trick, since when he fell backwards he did smack the back of his head against ground. But each time he reviewed the memory, what his eyes saw did not lie to him. Somehow the shield did in fact bounce off the two walls on opposite sides of his bedroom. Bouncing off of one wall was a given since he remembered how hard he threw the shield when he fell, but Izuku knew he had nowhere near the kind of strength required to make the shield bounce off two walls that were clearly not next to each other. Then the realization hit him as remembered again, when he remembered that after the shield bounced off the wall that was in front of him, that had bounced off the wall behind him a second time. The first thoughts that came to Izuku's mind seemed to contradict what he knew about the world. The only way something can bounce off two walls quickly enough would be if rubber materials like a bouncing ball had been thrown. But the shield was made of out metal with nothing to indicate that anything about it was even remotely made of rubber. The straps that were on the inside of the shield were, which Izuku figured was meant so an arm can be used to support the shield and wear it on the arm at the same time, were certainly not rubber, nor were they what connected with the walls after the shield was thrown. The second thought was that maybe some kind of quirk had been applied to it that changed the metal's properties. That seemed logical to the boy because Izuku had seen several villains that fought All Might did do some things to everyday material like concrete or steel that made them either melt or change forms. There was also that one video Izuku saw where All Might saved a child that fell into a river and his quirk was able to change the property of water into vinegar. Izuku knew that sometimes a kid, one that probably the same age as himself, might not know how to swim all that well. And he doubts swimming in vinegar was the same as swimming in water. That seemed to be the answer, the more Izuku thought about it. That maybe somewhere else in the world, someone had a quirk that could make anything that was made of metal or had metal properties to it to be the same as throwing a rubber ball around the room. And yet, it also felt wrong. There was a nagging voice in the back of Izuku's mind telling him that the shield was special on its own. No quirk had been used on it ever. Izuku picked up the shield again with his small hands and lifted up enough where it seemed he could faintly see his own reflection in the metallic surface. It wasn't too strange that he could see his face in the 5-point star symbol in the middle of the shield, but it also seemed right to him in some strange way. Izuku thought back to the night before he found the shield, to when he made his wish to the night sky. How he made the wish with all of his heart to be a hero. His heart told him that his wish was heard that night, and that this shield that fell from the sky was meant to be used by someone who embodied what it meant to be a hero. For any rational adult, it may have been too much of a leap that Izuku made in his mind that how special this shield was, and that somehow it was meant to be with someone special. That conclusion brought a smile to Izuku's face. The kind where a boy isn't just showing his teeth, but how much joy something they felt that their mouths were almost fully open because of said smile. Even though his mother did put up notices to see if anyone in the area might be the original owner of the shield in his hands, Izuku was now more sure than ever that this shield was meant for him to use in the road to becoming the next world's greatest hero. It was with some reluctance that Izuku put the shield where it was originally in his room. This time he was making sure that he didn't accidentally throw it and cause his mother to become unnecessarily worried. Well, any more than she probably already was at this point. Izuku walked over to a small desk that was in his room and pulled out a notebook he had been writing in. Since it was in crayon, the writing within was somewhat legible, or at least it was with Izuku. The purpose of this notebook was to record all the information he could get or see about any hero or villain that appeared on the news or on the internet. He had another notebook in the same drawer, and its original purpose was to be used when the first notebook was full of all the information that Izuku could write in it. Now this one had a different, but no less important purpose. With a nearby red crayon, Izuku wrote on the cover of the notebook, "Plans to become the mightiest pro-hero with a shield." The minute he finished writing what would be on the cover did Izuku follow up writing within the notebook's pages what he believed to be the necessary steps to realizing the success to the plan. To be the hero he saw within his mind. Even for a 5-year-old, that was a fateful week that would be next to impossible to forget. A week that created a drive within him to do more than he ever thought possible over the next 10 years. Izuku Midoriya became more physically active than he was before, or for any child that was his age. Doing just about everything that could increase his strength and endurance in whatever ways he could think of. Even if it meant that in the beginning, he could only run at his best speed for less than 30 seconds. That fact told him he wouldn't get better unless he constantly gave it his all each day. Soon enough, when he could run for over 30 seconds without needing to stop and catch his breath, Izuku took that as proof he was getting stronger each day. He also continued his research each day in regards to how to continually develop physically and about the pro-heroes that appeared not to mention anything related to All Might. His mother might have thought it was a tad obsessive, but she felt it was something that her son needed to keep his spirits up. During those years, Inko had some thoughts that she wasn't able to put to rest satisfactorily. She wasn't entirely positive, but she had her suspicions over time that her son was getting into fights either while at school or when he was out of the apartment. Izuku would keep telling her that he might have overdid it with his training, but she recognized burn marks on fabric like shirts or even bare skin. Inko did ask Mitsuki Bakugo if her son Katsuki Bakugo was being cruel to Izuku. Some of the answers she got from Mitsuki weren't all that reassuring, but even Inko could see as one mother to another some issues had arisen with her son over time, and she wasn't having much success in addressing them. Whether or not her son and Mitsuki's son were getting into fights was never fully answered, and neither parent heard anything from the school about such things, so both had to go by the assumption that Izuku and Bakugo were still friends. Or at least until clearly proven otherwise. But Izuku took his ordeals and issues with Bakugo as a challenge. When it was made clear the entire school, classmates, teachers, and faculty members were fully aware that he was quirkless, Izuku didn't let the comments and the taunting wear him down. There were days when it was easy to deal with such things and others where it felt like giving up seemed the only course left to him. Especially the times when Bakugo mocked his research into other pro-heroes and told him almost each time that he should just kill himself to spare the world of his quirkless nature. Being told by someone you once considered a friend that your best choice in life is to end it always stung the heart every time you hear the words. But what kept those words from taking root in his heart was reminding himself that he was facing the same kind of challenges that All Might faced. Too many times did villains that stood against the symbol of peace and justice call him practically every kind of insults and profanity known in the world, and then some. Never once did the legendary hero let the words cause his ever-present smile to falter even once. No doubt in Izuku's mind that was something of a constant issue that All Might dealt with, and not all of his exploits were followed in great detail. One thing Izuku saw that seemed to be common among pro-heroes, which did include All Might, was that the villains they fought only had the kind of information that explained what kind of problem they caused, and what kind of quirk they had or used in committing said crime or fight against pro-heroes. Maybe a few other details here and there like what they called themselves, but clearly nothing about what they said to the pro-hero they face off against, which made a kind of sense, since it was doubtful any newspaper or media wanted to report the insults of captured villains. And if All Might had to deal with that, and never once let it get to him, then Izuku wasn't going to let what everyone who called him the quirkless wonder get to him either. His mother once told him an old saying about how actions speak louder than words, and if Izuku kept getting up no matter how many times others put him down, that proved to himself he could still be a hero. Even if it meant Bakugo kept knocking him down on an almost daily basis, followed up everyone else at school laughing as he did so, and enduring it all. Now 15 years old, and in the last year of attending Aldera Junior High, Izuku felt the drive to be a hero more than ever before. It was probably what allowed him to have the extra energy to easily run to school without any heavy breathing. He wasn't running late since he had more than enough time to make it to school. It was part of his ongoing training to keep his body both into shape and increase his physical abilities. Some of the books he had obtained over the years on exercises told him that jogging did help increase leg muscles and breathing capacity. Some even said that if developed properly over time, then the person can do a flat run with increasing extended periods of time. That was something Izuku saw to be true, or at least true in regards to his body. Couple of times when Bakugo and his two faithful followers decided to gang up on him, Izuku managed to outmaneuver them and goaded into chasing him in some of the back alleys. Izuku learned that Bakugo had learned to use his explosive quirk to have a kind of flight capability if directed properly, and the one whose quirk allowed him to have bat-like wings, which could achieve flight, made them both rather solid tests in seeing how fast Izuku could run. It was easy to outrun the one who could fly with his bat-like wings, since it seemed he either never thought about developing them more or had no drive to do so. But Izuku learned early that Bakugo also took Izuku's runs as a kind of training for him and his quirk as well. There were a few times Bakugo caught up to him, but the rest of the time Izuku managed to outrun or outmaneuver him by using his surroundings to his advantage. Each time that happened, Bakugo would use the following day to let off some new insults to either put Izuku down more or remind Izuku that someone with a quirk is just better than 100 people without a quirk. That increased his drive to be a hero all the more. Just seeing Bakugo getting better on his own just told Izuku he couldn't slack off even for a moment. And that also meant learning new ways to become better both physically and mentally. While the jogging to school increased his body's strength, what happened before him was what he used as a means to increase his mental abilities and comprehension. It was something of a common scene that could happen at any given moment. Someone who clearly had a rather impressive quirk was going out of his or her, since sometimes looks alone couldn't tell you if they were male or female, way to make a mess of things. At a train station that was above the streets, Izuku could see what looked like someone who resembled a kind of shark, but was clearly 3 times the height of a person, roaring like a wild animal and causing destruction by flailing his or hers arms around. The police were keeping people from getting too close, and Izuku overheard someone talking in the crowd that the person causing the destruction in public had tried to steal some woman's purse. Izuku agreed when he heard someone said it was an idiotic move to make in both broad daylight and during the time when a lot of people were on the streets. The odds were good that a pro-hero would on patrol at this point of time during the day, and said pro-hero would catch this criminal almost immediately. That was when Izuku saw something move just outside the corner of his eye. Looking up, he smiled when he recognized the pro-hero Kamui Woods. Izuku had heard this new pro-hero had just come onto the scene recently, but word on all the internet sites was that he was making a name for himself at a rather fast pace. Always on hand was a notebook for recording pro-hero information, because he felt that at any given moment something new or someone new would appear, and the information would prove beneficial later on, and Izuku felt that this was the best time to see and record what Kamui Woods can do for himself. Watching how the pro-hero moved around using his quirk, Izuku could tell that his movements were well polished and honed. A sign that this one knew what he could do with his quirk. Izuku wasn't sure how long the fight between the giant villain and Kamui Woods had been going on, but he also noticed other pro-heroes appeared. When the villain knocked over some high-tension power lines trying to take a swipe at Kamui Woods, Another pro-hero by the name Death Arms came rushing in to catch the large metal framework of the power lines before impacted on the ground, using his super strength quirk. It wasn't rare that multiple pro-heroes would appear at a scene like this. Just more information for Izuku to write down in his notebook. But what was rare was a teenager writing in a notebook and muttering himself about what he was seeing in front of him. Among a crowd of people that was staring at the fight between two quirk users, Izuku seemed to stand out the most to a man that's standing next to him, writing down what's going on in a fight and smiling, while muttering, "Gotta say that makes you a most unique fanboy I've ever seen." Izuku turned towards the man and gave a sheepish smile as a response. It wasn't like there was anything wrong with being a fan of pro-heroes. Not to mention, there was a group of girls that was also watching the fight were all calling out how much they love Kamui Woods. It's one thing to see a hero in action on the TV or internet video. It's a whole other and better thing to see them in action like this. Izuku couldn't really keep his excitement in check as he watched Kamui Woods dodge 2 more attacks with the villain yelling at him that they'll break them to bits. The man only gave a smile in response as he returned his attention to the fight as well. When it became clear that Kamui Woods was getting ready to end the fight, Izuku felt his heart race a little more in excitement since he would get to see the specialty attack. The preemptive binding lacquered chain prison. "Take him own tree, man," yelled out the man standing next to Izuku. Izuku was entirely focused on what Kamui Woods was preparing to do that he didn't notice something else until he heard a female voice yell out, "Canyon Cannon." Izuku turned his attention to what he couldn't believe he didn't see coming, but another pro-hero, a blonde woman and a giant one at that, come flying into the fight and connecting a powerful kick strike to the villain's head. That alone ended the fight, but Izuku was more surprised that the woman, Wood was clearly bigger than the villain, appeared out of nowhere. Sneak attacks to end a fight weren't necessarily a bad thing for pro-heroes to do, but seriously, Izuku was asking himself, where did she come from? "Today's my debut. Pleased to meet you all. You can call me Mount Lady," the woman pro-hero said, while striking a pose that even Izuku knew was to get a certain kind of response from at least the male side of the crowd. Even the voice she spoke in definitely had some undertones to it. Izuku wondered if this was part of the legacy that the R-rated hero Midnight had created when she first became a pro-hero herself. There were plenty of other known pro-hero women all across Japan that had fan clubs just for their looks, but most of them didn't try to stand out in said looks alone. To Izuku, this one before him seemed to be following the same path, or alongside the same path as Midnight. Then Izuku had to remind himself that pro-heroes were basically peacekeepers overseen by the government, and those that performed the best got paid the most, and also got all the fame and glory that came with it. Their careers depended on their ability to stay in the spotlight. Izuku didn't fully agree with that aspect of being a pro-hero, but since pro-heroes were civil servants, that followed the reason that they would get paid for said services. Another part that Izuku didn't fully agree with was how fast most of the men in the crowd whipped out any kind of camera they had and started taking pictures of Mount Lady, especially as she continued her said pose. He wasn't entirely sure, but Izuku could have sworn some of them were saying the same word in sync as they took pictures. Money shot. Izuku continued to watch even after the fight had finished, when the police quickly moved in and placed restraints on the villain before he regained consciousness. He wanted to see what kind of quirk Mount Lady truly had, since there had been reports of other quirks that can allow people to grow big, and some required certain conditions be met. Watching her shrink down and literally be the same in appearance at human size formed several conclusions in Izuku's head. Clearly her quirk is gigantification. Definitely a powerful quirk, and she's got the looks and the attitude to instantly be a crowd favorite. But it seems to have a couple of obvious drawbacks, with the first one being the great risk to property damage if she intends to work in city and urban areas. She clearly has significant strength, easily amplified when she increases size. But can she control her quirk so she can be between her normal height and maximum height? Or is there also a time limit to how long she is able to remain in such a state, since the bigger one gets? Then the body might require more nutrients or even calories to maintain her giant form. Ha! Never seen a fanboy mutter so much and take such extensive notes at the same time. Guess that means you want to be a hero too, huh? That was enough to break Izuku out his habit in writing down new quirk and pro-hero information in his notebook. He looked back at the man who said and saw he was giving him a smile and a thumbs up at the same time. Hold on to that dream. The world can always use another hero in the making. Make sure to aim for being the best. To hear a rather complete strange say that to him definitely made the smile on his face beam even more. "I will, thanks," Izuku replied before noticing the time and that he had to hurry to make it to school on time. In a way, this was the perfect time to test himself on how fast he could really run if he gave it his all. Just with time to spare. And it literally was just. Izuku got to his classroom and took his seat that was one step shy of being at the back of the class. Some of the other students noticed him, while most paid not attention to him at all. Even Katsuki Bakugo, who was simply lounging at his seat in a manner that said he was so bored with everything. When class finally started, and the students all took their seats, the teacher came in with a handful of paperwork that he set down on his desk. So, as third-year students, it's time to start thinking seriously about your futures and what you want to do with your lives. I could pass out some career aptitude tests, but why bother? The teacher throws away the paperwork that was on his desk. I know all of you want to take the hero track. The entire classroom cheered and began showing off their quirks in response to the excitement they all were collectively feeling. Izuku wanted to join in on the class cheer, but virtually all of his classmates were showing off their quirk, which meant at the moment he had no place in the cheer. Yes, you all have impressive quirks, but you know it's against the rules to use them in class. The teacher said, even though the other students were still happily showing off what they could do. Izuku did admit there were some in his class that had decent-looking quirks. But he also knew what was about to happen after the teacher had said you all. Hey, sensei, don't lump me in with these losers. The entire attention of the students focused immediately on Bakugo in an instant. Izuku felt like letting out a sigh to the situation, but kept it to himself. Based off of past experiences, what was going to happen next was something of the norm with this class. As if I had anything like their crappy quirks. Ha! Katsuki Bakugo said, while still reclining in his chair with his feet up on the desk. Get over yourself, Katsuki. Like you're actually better than us. Man, does the ego on you have an actual off switch? And other statements were directed at Bakugo. Each one that was said did have a small part of Izuku agree with them, but he opted for being silent at the moment. Shut up. Extras should act like extras. Most of you will be lucky if you end up as sidekicks to some busted-down D-lister. Bakugo yelled back, which made the other students quiet down enough. But some were still voicing their current levels of irritation Bakugo had created. Huh. Well, you certainly have impressive test scores, the teacher said, while going over the current information he had on said student. Maybe you will get into UA High. He's gonna try for the national school. The cutoff score for this year is 79, right? I hear they barely accept anyone. That place has a 0.2 acceptance rate, no matter what year it is. It's impossible to get into. Izuku was impressed how fast the other students went from yelling at Bakugo to being shocked at what they learned about Bakugo. Then again, there probably wasn't a single student with a quirk in all of Japan that didn't know about the most prestigious high school for pro heroes. Ah, the stupid chattering of extras, Bakugo said, while standing up and taking a stance on his desk. It's impossible for extras to get into, but it's the only place worthy for someone like me. I aced the mock exams. I am the only student at this school who stands a chance at getting in. Izuku had to keep himself from letting out a groan at how Bakugo was so effortlessly stroking his own ego. Izuku remembered that before both of them started attending Aldera Junior High, Bakugo would flat out say he had what it takes to be a pro hero. Now, if given half a chance, Bakugo wouldn't hesitate to either show or remind the others why he was the best there is in this school, if not the whole country. I'll end up more popular than All Might himself. Not to mention, I'll be one of the richest people in the world. People all across the world will know who I am. And it all starts with UA High. Izuku wondered if Bakugo expected the other students to start applauding to his declaration. They all certainly had a look of wonderment on their faces, with a few being either just jealous or annoyed with him. Oh yeah, Midoriya, don't you want to go to UA High too? That caught Izuku and the class by complete surprise. So much so that even Bakugo seemed to freeze in place after hearing those words being spoken. Izuku gave the teacher an annoyed look, because there was no reason why he should have said it out loud in the first place. Then again, being the quirkless wonder of Aldera Junior High, being mocked for wanting to be a hero seemed to be synonymous with his name, and most of the teachers either did so to be cruel or didn't think they were being cruel. Like reminding the students there was an actual quirkless person in the same class as them, and not caring if it creates a bullseye on him or not. All the students turned their attention from Bakugo to Izuku at that moment, before all of them uproariously laughed at him. Izuku was used to the mocking by his fellow classmates, but it didn't sting any less each time they did it. You're kidding, right? There's no way you're getting into the hero course without a quirk. Good grades alone won't get you in, you know that. You hit your head or something because that sounds like the worst kind of fever dream to have. You can't get into a school meant to train those with quirks if you don't have a quirk yourself. Izuku stood up from his desk to address his fellow classmates. Actually, they got rid of that rule. Without question, getting in would be a challenge for anyone, but I could be the first one to pass the entrance exam who doesn't have a quirk. Izuku was more than prepared for more mocking, but he didn't expect Bakugo to react too explosively to what he had just said by slamming his hand onto Izuku's desk and causing a strong enough explosion to knock Izuku backwards. Listen up, Deku. You're even worse than the rest of these damn rejects, you quirkless wannabe. You really think they would let someone like you into their program when they could have me? Bakugo yelled out at Izuku with some significant smoke coming from the hand he used to create said explosion. Izuku shot a glance at the teacher and noticed he didn't show any signs of surprise at what Bakugo had just done. The teacher had just reminded all the students just minutes before about there were rules against using quirks on school grounds, and Bakugo's quirk was easily a dangerous one that hurt someone even if the hot-tempered teenager didn't mean it. And being sent flying out of his chair as a result of using said quirk was definitely the intent on Bakugo's part, and there was no way the teacher didn't miss that. Another sad example in Izuku's view that not only is everybody not born as equals, but some don't even care for equality later on in their years. Looking back at Bakugo, Izuku saw the anger on his face and his hand raised in the air like he was getting ready to use it to unleash another explosion on him. There was some nervousness in him at this moment, but he knew it was better to stand up than stay on the ground, which was something Bakugo seemed to do what he could to remind Izuku that was his constant position in life. If you think I'm competing with you, you're wrong. I've wanted to be a hero ever since I was little. I may not have a quirk, but that doesn't mean I can't try my hardest. Just as any pro hero does. Izuku's words were honest. And yet somehow it seemed to annoy Bakugo even more. With both of his hands out in the open, Bakugo glared at Izuku with smoke emanating off of each hand, like a sign that his personal patience and temperament were burning away. You never be able to hang with the best of the best. You die in the entrance exam alone. Then a rather harsh smile appeared on his face before he spoke again. Defenseless, Izuku. The school's already crappy, and you really want to embarrass it more by failing so hard. Think about it, what you just said. You said you're going to take the entrance exam just to try? What can you even do? It actually pained Izuku that he didn't have an answer for Bakugo. The only answer anyone in the class wanted to hear was the kind that had the term quirk in it. The entire classroom was quiet for about a minute before the teacher reminded everyone that they should be focused on their academic studies and leave at the mocking they wanted to do to Izuku for after school. Bakugo let out a harumph when that was said and returned to his seat after shooting one more glare at Izuku. When Izuku returned to his desk, he noticed something about the surface of it that confirmed a suspicion he had for the longest time, and Bakugo's explosive quirk uncovered it when he slammed his hand on the surface. So far each year in Aldera Junior High, the desk that was assigned to Izuku would inevitably have someone etch or scratch words into it. Works that called him everything in between quirkless and loser. He made mention to the teacher about it a couple of times and managed to convince him using the excuse of damaged school property in order to get a new desk. But as he thought, the only thing the school actually did was paint over the surface. A practical means of fixing a problem. But it also reminded him that even if he didn't see it, he was still being mocked because of being quirkless. The rest of the school day continued on after that. It wasn't as if they all forgot what was said, or rather yelled out, by Bakugo. But when the end of the day school bell finally rung, it seemed most of them were in a hurry to be somewhere else than at school. Izuku didn't pay much mind to the others leaving, but he found it rather strange that Bakugo and his two followers decided to stick around until it was only the four of them left in the classroom. Izuku was in the middle of gathering his things into his backpack when Bakugo walked up to him. His eyes seemed to convey the message that he was bored at the moment, but there were hints of anger within too. Most first-string heroes show their potential early on. People just look at them and know they're destined for greatness, Bakugo said when he knew Izuku had focused his attention on him. Make no mistake, Deku, that when I'm the only student from this garbage junior high to get into UA, people will start talking about me like that. They'll realize I'm legit, the next big thing. Bakugo showed off a smug smile before he finished saying what was on his mind. That's not ego talking, I just know I'm that good. Izuku could have sworn that he heard one of the other two behind Bakugo say the word ego, right after Bakugo himself said that he wasn't speaking from his ego. If he hadn't heard that, then Izuku would have stopped Bakugo from reaching into his backpack and removed the notebook he had been writing in, the one he used when he saw Kamui Woods and Mount Lady. Give that back. Izuku tried to reach out to grab it, but Bakugo smacked his hand away while holding the notebook as if he just picked up a piece of trash. You're still taking notes on pro heroes. Bakugo looked at the notebook with growing disgust before he looked at Izuku. Consider this a favor I'm doing for a worthless nobody like you, Deku. With both hands slapping together with the notebook in between them, Bakugo caused a minor explosion that essentially burned the notebook. But it didn't end there. When it was certain the notebook would continue to burn until it turned into a pile of ash, Izuku watched as Bakugo casually threw it out the window behind him in the same manner someone does when throwing away a used napkin near a wastebasket, and not caring if it fell into the wastebasket or not. Give it up, Deku. You may be good at running, but that only says you're good at running away from danger, and heroes always run towards the danger. Izuku wanted to retort, wanted to even yell out the words at Bakugo. But he could tell just from his eyes that no matter what he said at the moment, Bakugo wasn't going to hear it. Both teenagers just stared at each other for a few moments before one of the two followers of Bakugo said something about leaving the quirkless wonder before his loser stink stains their school uniforms. As the three of them walked away from Izuku, the teenage boy was trying to keep his anger in check. Right now he so wanted to just lash out for being told to give up his dream of being hero. But apparently someone either knew that's what Izuku was feeling, or decided to throw more salt on the wound he just made. You know, if you really want to be a hero that badly, there actually might be another way. Just pray that you'll be born with a quirk in you next life, and take a swan dive off the roof of this school. Bakugo actually smiled at Izuku when he said that. That got the attention of the other two teenagers, who shared a look thinking that Bakugo stepped out of line with that comment. Izuku couldn't help but shoot a glare at Bakugo when he was told that. Bakugo's only response was to show off another demonstration of his explosive quirk, and a smug smile at the same time. It took some doing, but Izuku was able to rein in his anger, which made Bakugo let out a laugh, and the other two making comments about how Izuku proved he clearly doesn't have any kind of fight in him. After they were gone, did Izuku make his way down to where he saw his notebook was. It was burnt and waterlogged, and some fish were apparently nibbling on it, which felt strange to Izuku since what were the odds that throwing a notebook out the window would have it land in the school's fish pond? That thought didn't last in his mind, since it got replaced when Izuku could see his reflection in the water surface. His mind was repeating the last thing Bakugo said to him as a way of reminding him that it wasn't the first time Bakugo said that exact same thing. It didn't hurt the first time Bakugo said it to him, so Izuku just let it slide. But now whenever Bakugo felt the need to, he would always say that Izuku should kill himself with no other reason than because he had no quirk. Those thoughts plagued his mind more than usual. He wasn't sure why now was any different than all the times before. Maybe it was because the thought of getting into Ua High wasn't as real as it was now, and maybe Bakugo was somehow threatened by Izuku. That last part made Izuku laugh, because he knew that if there was anything that threatened one Katsuki Bakugo, it wouldn't be him even in a million years. Whatever the case may be, it was something that Izuku decided wasn't worth the time thinking about. He hadn't done all that he could over the last 10 years to get himself into the kind of physical shape he knew he had to be in order to use the shield. Wasting even a minute of time on such depressing thoughts would be not only an insult at himself, but it would mean he wasn't worthy of the goal that the shield represented. Izuku made himself remember what he learned about the shield after the time had passed where his mother said no one had come to claim it, so it officially belonged to him. The first thought he had was when he wanted to see how strong the shield was in protecting something which involved an experiment using several eggs and a hammer. With the shield covering the eggs, Izuku used a hammer and hit the shield as hard as he could, even though he was still a little boy at the time, and learned very quickly two things. The instant the hammer hit the shield did the hammer bounce back, with the same amount of force Izuku had put into swinging it. Izuku had put all his weight and strength in bringing down the hammer as hard as he could, so it completely surprised him when he somehow fully body vaulted backwards like an action figure that fell forward, and then got finger flicked backwards. The second thing he learned, which he wasn't sure why he thought it was a good idea in the first place, was to use the couch to jump off of, in order to put more force into the hammer hitting the shield. The end result of that test, which started with Izuku jumping off of the couch and bringing the hammer down as he fell to the ground, was Izuku full body bouncing off of the shield and on the opposite side of the room, landing with a hard thud on the floor. As a result meant Izuku needed a moment before he tried something else with the shield. He was glad that at the time his mother was out doing some shopping and wouldn't be back for at least an hour. Double-checking on the state of the eggs that the shield was covering did come as a surprise that none of them cracked. Izuku knew that there were some strong metals that when hit hard enough tend to flex as a result, but only for an instant, and the status of the eggs were telling him that the shield was indeed made from some kind of rigid form of metal. The final test he did that day took some doing, but he used the eggs to prop the shield off of the floor at 4 points. He wasn't sure why this kind of test seemed important to do, since there was a good chance the eggs would just break under the weight of the shield. But when it didn't happen right away, Izuku quickly seized that moment to hit the shield again with the hammer. This time he decided to simply toss the hammer onto the shield, since the other times had him end up flying after hitting it. On the first try did the hammer land directly in the middle of the shield, and, to his surprise even today, that the hammer bounced off of the shield about as high as it had been when Izuku threw it. Izuku had to collect himself after seeing that, since it made him forget the eggs he had used to raise the shield off of the ground. For a moment, all 4 eggs didn't show any signs that they had been cracked. Eventually one did, but it seemed to be due to the weight of the shield, and not what Izuku had done with the hammer. That test was all that Izuku could think of doing in examining the shield at the time. That, and he couldn't keep using eggs since his mother would get suspicious of why she had to keep buying more. But the results of the test was more than enough for a small boy to imagine what else could the shield do. When he became old enough and strong enough to carry the shield on his own, Izuku took the shield to the same nearby forest, and wanted to see if what he saw before of the shield bouncing off of his walls was real or a fluke of some kind. When he found what looked to be a hard and flat enough surface, which was the form of a rather large boulder, Izuku used both hands and threw the shield at it. His form of throwing almost involved a full body spin, so as to ensure enough momentum was achieved. But Izuku wanted to see how strong he was at the time. Izuku's reaction time at that point in his life was average, but it was too slow to catch the shield when it came back at him after immediately bouncing off of the boulder. He had thrown it at about his chest height, so when the shield came back, it easily knocked him flat on his back and the air out of his lungs. Despite the pain he felt that day, Izuku was actually happy at what had happened to him. It took some years, but knowing what he saw as a child about the shield was true made it worth it. Those memories connected to the shield gave him the answer that he wished he could have said when Bakugo was basically screaming at him about he could do. With a smile on his face, as inspired by his idol All Might and the shield by his side, Izuku Midoriya would become a hero in his own right. Some would say that he was actively denying reality with such thoughts and dreams. But Izuku would tell them that once upon a time what happened daily world wasn't that of a comic book as it is now. A kind of rule that Izuku would later realize that he shouldn't have forgotten, since on his way home, he decided to take a different route that cut through a park, which had a small tunnel that went under the park. He was just about halfway through when he heard that manhole cover that he walked past rattle loudly before something appeared that looked easily dangerous. Whatever it was, it had eyes and a mouth, but the eyes alone said it wasn't friendly at all. Ah, good. A meat suit that I can hide in, the thing said before it shot straight at Izuku and enveloped him almost completely. It had moved so fast that Izuku didn't have time to react. His mind did register that what came at him was a villain, but that was all he could clearly recall. The next thing his mind was telling him that whatever it was, some kind of slime villain, it was forcing something down his mouth, which was choking the life out of him at the same time. I didn't expect to run into him in this city of all places. Guess it's wrong time and wrong place for the both of us, the voice said, which sounded like someone speaking while their head was underwater. Still, even he won't to think to look for me hiding in a meat suit until I get clear of the city. So thanks for all your help. Izuku was trying to claw at anything in order to get a grip on whatever it was holding to him. But each time he tried it felt like he was just grabbing sand that was underwater at beach. Don't bother, kid. My bodies isn't going to be ripped off so easily, so just be a good little boy and die already. Izuku felt himself starting to slip into darkness. He was running out of strength and air, and there was nothing he could do. He wanted to plead to anyone that might hear him to save him. He didn't want to die like this. The last thing he remembered clearly before the darkness took him completely was a sudden rush of wind passing over him. Is this what it feels like when your spirit leaves your body? He thought. Izuku wasn't sure how much time had passed, but he began to feel something that got his attention. Something that definitely seemed out of place if he was dead, and this was the afterlife. To him, it felt like someone was quickly slapping the side of his face. When he heard, "Hey, wake up, and are you all right?" it was enough to make Izuku realize that he wasn't dead. Or so he hoped. Opening his eyes and seeing who it was that was slapping him. Well, slapping him back to consciousness. Oh, good. For a minute there I worried. Sorry you got caught up in my hero work. I chased the vile villain into the sewer system, and, well, to be honest, I got turned around a bit. It took a minute for Izuku's mind to fully understand what, or who, he was seeing standing before him. Even wearing what could be called street clothes, there was no doubt that the man smiling before the teenager was the one pro hero in all of Japan, if not all of the world. All Might. But with your help, citizen, I was able to catch the dastardly fiend, All Might said, while showing the slime villain current situation, contained in a large soda pop bottle. Izuku might have wondered how that was possible, since he remembered that the villain itself probably could have filled up a couple of baths at public washhouse. But his mind was entirely focused on the symbol of peace and justice standing before him. All Might. In the flesh, standing here. Wow, he actually looks so cooler in person, Izuku said in a tone of voice that was barely above a whisper. When his mind finally made the connection that he was actually in the presence of All Might, did it switch hard over to his fanboy mode. He desperately looked for his notebook so as to get an autograph of the legendary hero. When he noticed the one that Bakugo had damaged earlier was on the ground, he reached for it and began practicing on how best to as All Might for his signature. It was when he was looking for a blank page to use did he notice that All Might had already signed his notebook. Seeing that signature made Izuku so happy and grateful that he repeatedly bowed before All Might while expressing his gratitude, and how All Might's signature in the notebook would become a family heirloom passed down for generations to come. Well, I must be off. Gotta get this guy to the police. A hero's work is never done, you know, All Might said while making sure the bottle that held the villain was secure in his large pants pocket. Hearing that from All Might brought Izuku out of his fanboy mode. This was literally a once-in-a-lifetime chance. Izuku knew that All Might got fan mail that asked questions ranging from everything, but the odds were good that he wasn't personally answering any of them. Even if, and when he did personal interviews, some of the questions felt like they were scripted, or the response given to some of them were scripted. Wait, that's it? He's just gonna leave? No, I still got so many things to ask him, Izuku thought to himself. He knew if he didn't ask the questions he had now, there will never come another chance, let alone would any of the answers he would get feel real. All Might did a couple of leg crunches to make sure he had a stable spot before launching himself into the air. His back was facing the person he had just saved, so he was completely unaware of what the teenager's expression was showing. He might have spent a few more moments with this person, but he was worried about the time limit since it took longer to stop the villain he was chasing than he thought, and he couldn't afford to waste what time he had left. The towering man of superhero muscle bent his knees one more time before he spoke up one more time. Now stand back, I'm taking off. The moment he said that, All Might used the strength in his legs to launch himself into the air. Thanks for your continued support, All Might yelled out as one final compliment to a fan of his. He figured he might never see him again, but at the very least he could make sure that the teenager was made aware that All Might recognized him as one of his fans. Being a pro hero meant getting a fanbase the longer you were in this line of work, and after a couple of decades, All Might was sure if taken count of his fans, it would probably be close to the combined population of 3 cities in Japan at least. About several seconds into his flight, All Might noticed something was off since it seemed he wasn't going as fast through the air as he expected. That was when he noticed some extra weight on one of his legs. When he looked back to see what it was, to say he was caught by complete surprise would have been an understatement. Wrapped tightly around his left leg was the same teenager he had just saved. Hey, what are you doing? All Might yelled out while trying to free himself from the teenager's grip. Let go already. I love my fans, but this is too much. Wait, don't. If I let go right now, I'll fall and die. All Might stopped in his attempt to break the teenager's grip on his leg, after realizing something that was so obvious. Oh, that's a good point. Looking back at the teenager's face, All Might had to restrain a laugh at seeing how flying through the air as they were was somehow causing the teenager's face to make comical shapes. Probably as a result of him trying to talk while wind was rushing past his face so quickly. You're my all-time favorite hero, All Might. There is so many things I want to ask of you. All right. Just close your eyes and keep your mouth shut. All Might replied while taking a hold of one of the teenager's arm to make sure he didn't suddenly let go while they were still in flight. He looked forward as he gauged as best as he could where he would land safely. At the same time, he suppressed a cough using his right hand, but felt something leave the over of his mouth. He didn't have to see it was a drop of his own blood leaving his mouth because the sensation of it alone was more than enough to tell him about his worries for his time limit was justified. Shit. Gotta land fast. All Might thought to himself before finding a suitable rooftop that he could aim for as a landing spot. It was a bit tricky of a landing, especially making sure the extra weight on his leg didn't take of the impact upon landing. When he was sure that the teenager was still all right. Well, as all right as someone who was claiming that they just saw their life flash before their eyes. All Might decided he had wasted more than enough time. That was a rather foolish thing you did. All Might didn't like to scold people, much less a fan of his, but something had to be said for the teenager's actions. When he was sure there was a door that allowed rooftop access of the building they were on, he told the teenager to bang on it, and someone would eventually come along to open the door for him. Once All Might began walking towards the rooftop railing in preparation of taking off again, the teenager spoke up, asking him to wait. No, I don't have time to wait. All Might was starting to get a little annoyed, but he was more worried about how much more time he had left in his current form. Can someone without a quirk be a hero like you? Of all the questions that Izuku wanted to ask, that was the most important one he had within his heart, and the only one he knew had to be asked. To put it simply, if there was only one question in all of their life that someone could ask, because they knew the answer held the most meaning than anything else in the world, would they seize the only moment where asking said question mattered the most? For Izuku Midoriya, this was that moment. He could ask 100 random strangers on the street, and 100 random pro heroes every day for a year, and Izuku knew none of the answers he would get would carry any more meaning to them than the last one. This man before him, this legendary hero for decades, was the only one who not only had an answer, but to Izuku, it was the final answer to the question of his dream. Even with all the effort he had put into training himself to be better, to prove one day to all that he can be a hero, there was always that one voice in the back of his head that appeared the day the doctor told him that there was no hope for him to develop a quirk. There were days it was loud and days when it was quiet, and even some days when it was silent. But now, in the presence of the one pro hero of Japan, the voice was practically screaming in his head that Izuku saw what it took to be a hero, and no matter what he does, that he will never have anything close to what he needs to be even half the kind of hero All Might is. For All Might, there was some questions he was expecting to be asked. Some were a common theme among his fans, others were uncommon, and some were just downright weird in his view. But what this teenager just asked him was literally the first time in years he had ever heard something he had once asked himself. A lot of painful memories came flooding into his mind as a result, which made All Might stood still in place. It may have seemed like he was waiting for the teenager to clarify what his question meant, so Izuku decided to help All Might understand his question by explaining a little history behind it. Because I don't have a quirk. Maybe that's not the only reason. But I've always been picked on. Izuku wanted to say everything but decided against it. He knew he had to say what he felt mattered the most to his question. That's why. Maybe that's why. I think saving people is just about the coolest thing someone can do. All Might did hear what the teenager said after he reined in his memories and thought about what he was being asked. Without a quirk, you say? All Might looked back at the teenager and noticed he was fidgeting with his thumbs and his gaze was turned away from him. He decided to tell the fanboy what he felt was the honest answer to the question, but was stopped when he felt his body suddenly become weak and steam started to emanate all around him. The time limit had been reached, and there was nothing he could do stop what happened as a result of it. They say no one can be a hero without a quirk, but I think they're wrong. Izuku, whose gaze was still directed away from where he knew All Might was standing, inhaled some extra air to ask again the only question he had within his heart. Without a quirk, can I still become a hero? The moment he looked at All Might's direction to see what kind he would get from his favorite hero. In the midst of steam or smoke stood a man that was barely above a living skeleton looking right back at him. The proverbial needle stopping on a playing LP record happened in Izuku's mind. He could have sworn on his life that All Might was standing where this skinny man was just moments earlier. His reaction wasn't surprising. The surprising yell alone from the teenager was loud, but it did annoy All Might a bit. Mostly since now he had to explain to a fan of his what was going on and trust that said fanboy didn't blab all over the internet about what he was going to reveal. All Might did consider lying to the teenager, telling him that he was a pro hero who doubled as All Might, that his quirk allowed him to copy others and their abilities for a set amount of time. It wasn't entirely a lie, but All Might decided against it since it wasn't entirely the truth. And if he told anything less than the truth to this fanboy, then the answer he would give to the teenager's question would be an insult in many ways. After extracting a promise from the teenager to keep what he was about to say a secret, All Might showed Izuku the rather large scar on the side of his body. He told him that he got it in a fight over 5 years ago, which left him with a severely compromised respiratory system, and most if not all of his stomach gone. All the surgeries he had to undergo took their toll on him, and as final result restricted his hero time to about 3 hours each day. The teenager asked if it was because of his battle with the villain Toxic Chainsaw. All Might was impressed that the teenager knew about that fight, but told him that as bad as Toxic Chainsaw was, he wasn't someone that gave merit to him being a serious villain. Or at least not as serious as the one who gave All Might such crippling injuries. All Might explained he did what he could so the world would never know of the fight in which he almost died to win. He said that the world needed to know that the symbol of peace and justice would always remain smiling and never be daunted by evil. And being the guy that always saved people with a smile on his face, I have to make sure that the people don't know that there is plenty of fear behind said smile. All Might laughed at himself when he came to a realization of sorts. I guess the main reason why I smile is to mask the overwhelming pressure and fear that I feel at times. Izuku was quiet as he heard All Might speak to him. The words on the surface were spoken at normal volumes, but for Izuku, it felt as though All Might was screaming them at him. Each word seemed to chip away or form a crack. Make no mistake, young man. A pro-hero should always be ready to risk their lives. It's just that, sometimes, villains can't be beat without powers. Hearing that last part from All Might felt like a dagger had hit his heart. It hurt a lot, but not as much as what he was about to hear next. So no, I honestly don't think you can become a hero without a quirk. All Might said with as much seriousness as he could put into his voice. And that part from All Might felt as if the dagger that stabbed his heart was not being twisted to make sure the kill was confirmed. I see. Izuku was doing his best not to show how much pain in his chest he was feeling at All Might's words. He hoped that the tears he felt wanting to form didn't appear on his face. At least not for a while. All Might was aware of what he said, but felt the need to continue speaking. If you want to help people, there are plenty of other ways to do it. You can become a police officer. You may get a lot of crap because heroes capture most of the villains, but it is a fine profession. There was truth to it, since there were some police officers that did have quirks, but weren't exactly pro-heroes either. Even All Might knew of someone he felt was an exemplary police officer, and the man proved his merits without a quirk either. All Might moved from his spot on the rooftop and walked over to the door to see if it was unlocked. Thankfully, it was, since with his time limit had been reached. He couldn't use his muscle form anytime soon, so jumping down to the street wasn't an option. Before he walked through the door, All Might felt he might have been too harsh with his words. He did see how the teenager's expression reflected what he was feeling inside, and in his career as a pro-hero, All Might had seen it enough times to know what it was. The person's whole world just fell apart right in front of them. Whether it would seem like he was doing it to ease his own conscience, or maybe remind the teenager that there was still hope left for him, All Might spoke the thoughts left in his own mind. It's not bad to have dreams, young man. Just make sure your dreams are attainable. Realistic. Understand? With that said, All Might disappeared past the door and into the stairwell. Izuku's mind was as conflicted as one could be with what he was told, what he knew, and what he felt in his heart. The no. One pro-hero, the symbol of justice and peace, the one he had looked up to all his life, who even saved his life just minutes earlier, told Izuku the one thing virtually everyone else told him. Something he both knew and didn't want to hear. To be a hero, you needed a quirk, and Izuku Midoriya was born quirkless. The teenager might have stayed standing still in his spot on the roof until the sun went down. But when a distant explosion sound and the rise of a large column of smoke appear not too far off in the distance, Izuku's curiosity about what villain appeared and which pro-hero was at the site sparked him to move as quickly as he could to the location. No sooner did his hand reach for the door handle to open the door did his mind replay the answer that All Might had given to him in regards to his question. That alone killed the curiosity that was strong within him and made Izuku all the more depressed as a result. His mind was more or less set into a kind of autopilot as he walked down the stairs and out of the building, not really caring where his walking legs were taking him. He wasn't entirely sure why he pulled out the burnt notebook and read the information that he had written into it. Reading what he had written about Kamui Woods and Mount Lady, both practical and side observation notes. One last-ditch attempt to remember why he wanted to be a hero in the first place. Or maybe it was a kind of a farewell, since now he knew without a doubt that he had been running from reality. That he knew the truth deep down all this time. Whatever the case may be, Izuku had never felt so depressed in his life. It actually felt like now was the worst time in his life. Far worse than when he was told he didn't have a quirk. It made him come to a realization of how desperate he was in trying to prove everyone wrong, and that included himself. That everything he did over the years was essentially him running as hard and fast as he could from the truth. The sense of depression was strong enough that Izuku didn't realize where he had walked to, which was the Tatooine shopping district, and that what was causing the smoke and fire he had seen from the rooftop was the result of the same slime villain that All Might had defeated and captured. When Izuku remembered how All Might had captured the slime villain, and which pants pocket he had put the soda bottle in, he remembered that when he saw All Might had changed for that said pants pocket was completely empty. So distracted he was at seeing All Might in such a state that the obvious flew right past him, and only now did he remember it. That formed a connection that the damage and destruction the slime villain was causing was the direct result of his interference. Had Izuku not grabbed onto All Might's leg when he took off into the air, then either the bottle wouldn't have been knocked out of the pocket, or All Might would have noticed before the villain woke up and started causing such destruction as it was doing now. Even with all the thoughts running in his head that told him what was happening was his fault, Izuku was aware enough to hear some talk among the crowd of people who were watching it. He heard one of them ask why none of the pro-heroes that were gathered were doing anything to stop the rampage. Someone said that the pro-heroes may have met their match, and if not, they couldn't do anything at the moment since the slime villain had taken a kid as a hostage. Hearing that greatly worried Izuku since he wasn't sure how long it was, but the slime villain almost killed him by suffocation. And if the slime villain had a hostage, then there was no doubt it was doing the same thing to person as it did to him. Izuku also took note of the pro-heroes that were facing off against the villain, and saw that none of them were doing anything against the slime villain, and mostly trying to keep any and all damage to a minimum. He even noticed Mount Lady in her giant state, but saw that she was doing nothing to help either. Where the slime villain was at the moment was too narrow of an area for Mount Lady to be even remotely effective. All of the pro-heroes and their quirks were totally useless in this situation. He was already blaming himself since it was his thinking that had he not did what he in regards to All Might, then the slime villain wouldn't have gotten free to cause this kind of chaos. Izuku blamed himself even more when someone in the crowd said that the slime villain had to have been the same one that All Might had been chasing earlier. Someone else said that there was no way All Might would have lost against the slime villain or failed to capture it. That was followed up by someone wondering why someone hasn't called All Might to help the heroes. It was clear that no one at the scene knew that that the time limit he told Izuku had been reached, and because of Izuku, he wouldn't able to stop the slime villain, much less save the hostage it had taken. It was all his fault that this happened. That was what he was telling himself over and over in his mind. Someone will come and help save the day. I'm sure. Someone. A real hero will come soon, Izuku told himself. He kept repeating that in his head, until he had a clear view of who the slime monster had taken hostage. Without question did Izuku Midoriya see the panicking face of Katsuki Bakugo half submerged within the slime villain. The moment he recognized what, or rather who he saw, Izuku felt his entire mind go blank. Nothing else existed around him at that moment. What happened next wasn't a conscious decision on Izuku's part. His body moved faster than it ever had before. He ran past the crowd and the pro-heroes so quickly that they only managed to register someone was running directly at the slime villain. Unbeknownst to Izuku, All Might was at the scene as well, and was in the middle of yelling at himself for how much of a failure he was in being unable to do something that all pro-heroes were supposed to do without question. He almost missed the sight of the fanboy that asked him earlier if he could still be a hero without a quirk run directly at the slime villain with a purpose. The sight also showed All Might that all the other pro-heroes that the teenager ran past did nothing stand still at the sight themselves. Stop, you idiot. You're gonna get yourself killed. All Might heard the pro-hero Death Arms yell out after the kid, but his entire focus was on what was happening. He watched as the teenager barreled right through burning debris until he got close enough to throw his backpack at the slime villain. Whatever the contents that were in the backpack, something caused the slime villain to react in reflex manner, and the reason was clear. His body was maybe a semi-liquid form, but his eyes were more vulnerable than the rest of him. What the teenager did created an opening where he began clawing at the body to help free the other teenager that the slime villain was using as hostage. In that moment, that very sight before him, All Might realized that he was right in calling himself pathetic. Even more so when he heard the teenager say something that drove that point straight home. I couldn't just stand there and watch you die. That was what All Might needed to remind himself that he had to do something, no matter the cost. Forcing himself to transform caused a lot of pain, but he powered through it and made his move just as the slime villain recovered and was going to strike down the teenager in the next few seconds. The crash of the slime villain's attack against All Might's arm was indeed strong, since it sent out a shockwave that sent some of the burning debris on the ground flying. I really am pathetic. Izuku had braced himself for the attack, But seeing that All Might blocked it, and then hearing what he said about being pathetic, caused more confusion than reassurance at what was happening in front of him. I told you the traits that make a great champion, but I see now I wasn't living up to my own ideals. All Might said before knocking the slime villain's arm away, and then reaching forward to grab a hold of the hostage and pulling him free. Pros are always risking their lives. That's the true test of a hero. With Bakugo freed, the slime villain cursed All Might and tried one last desperate attack to kill him. But All Might was already making his next move by throwing a specialty punch of his called Detroit Smash. The force from the punch was more than enough to blow apart the slime villain in an instant, and resulting gusting winds were a little too much for Bakugo and Izuku to handle as both were unconscious. While ending the fight against such an opponent was indeed impressive, All Might unwittingly added more to his fame and legend since his Detroit Smash actually caused the blue skies above them to change over to a sudden downpour. Even the gathered pro heroes were impressed, with some speculating that All Might caused the impromptu storm to put out all the fires that were still going on in this part of the shopping district at the same time. When the rain stopped and all bits of the slime villain had been gathered up by the pro heroes, took their time in chewing out Izuku for his reckless behavior while praising Bakugo for his bravery. All Might got caught by the reporters that seemed to appear out of nowhere and began asking him for any and all details about what happened. After the pro heroes felt like they had made sure they had gotten their point across to Izuku, did they let him go. Izuku noticed that a couple of the other pro heroes were still giving their praise to Bakugo, with some saying that they would be happy to have him as a sidekick if and when he turns pro himself. Izuku laughed at the sight, but paid no more attention to it when he started walking home. He knew he was going to get chewed out some more when he got home. Being late getting home from school would be the first reason, but considering that the reporters were already spreading word of All Might's latest work as the No. 1 pro hero, and probably making mention about how 2 junior high school students got caught up in it, Izuku could already hear his mother yelling at him that his hobby of recording information on pro heroes and villains didn't mean he had to get up close and personal to the point where his life was actually in danger. He was in the middle of his thoughts at how best to apologize to All Might. He figured it'd be best to do so on his fan website, but he knew he would have to keep some of the details that All Might told him a secret. It was at that moment he heard an all too familiar voice coming up from behind him. Deku. Turning around and seeing Bakugo was in a full-run sprint towards him. Izuku's curiosity was piqued at the moment. Bakugo knew where Izuku lived, but to the best of his knowledge, this was probably the first time in years that Izuku had ever seen Bakugo on this block of the suburban area. When he got within about 10 meters from him, and after taking a breath from his hard running, Bakugo leveled his gaze at Izuku before he spoke. "I never asked you to save me, as if you could, huh? Well, I could have beaten him myself." Saying Izuku was puzzled at the words being yelled at him by Bakugo was a clear understatement. "How dare a quirkless failure like you pity me, trying to win me over? Don't you dare mock me." Then it hit him. Izuku saw that Bakugo's ego was hurting, and it needed a reminder of sorts. Because Bakugo had always gone out of his way to remind Izuku that the world didn't accept quirkless people, Bakugo had also made sure to establish that his quirk alone was unbeatable. And if that was the case, if it was indisputable inside of Bakugo's mind, then the fact he couldn't easily free himself from the slime villain introduced a fact Bakugo couldn't readily accept. "You're just some quirkless failure that won't even cut it as a rent-a-cop. You didn't help me. You did nothing, so don't think you can look down upon me." Bakugo turned his back in a huff before yelling out one last thing as he walked away. "You're a useless nerd, and don't you forget it. I don't owe you anything." That pretty much confirmed it for Izuku. Bakugo's pride took a hit today. Of that there was no question, but how bad of a hit would probably have to be determined for another time. In Izuku's mind, there was nothing that Bakugo said to him at that moment worth mulling over. He had already been given the answer to the question that was burning in his heart by his idol. It wasn't an answer that lifted his spirits, but it was an answer nonetheless. All that was really left was for him to go home and think about what kind of future he could make for himself, now that being a pro hero was definitely off the table. "I am here." Seeing All Might appear before him in such an instant definitely surprised Izuku. "All Might, what are you doing here?" Izuku looked around, and he didn't see anyone around them. "How did you get rid of all those reporters that surrounded you?" All Might just laughed wholeheartedly at the question. "Ha ha 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 ha. I stand for justice, not sound bites." He did several muscular style poses as he continued, "Because I am All Mig." Seeing him change back into his skinny form and spewing up blood at the same instant was a very distressing sight. After getting his hacking cough under control, and wiping off the excess blood from his mouth. All Might spoke up, but in a tone of voice that clearly hinted at someone having expended a lot of their energy and need some time to recharge. "Young man, I came here to thank you, and also to discuss your question from earlier." Izuku was puzzled by that. He was sure All Might had given him his answer at least. "If you hadn't told me about your life. No, if you hadn't run into that fight. I would have been a worthless bystander watching from the crowd, so thanks." Izuku felt the need to apologize after hearing that. He told All Might that it was his fault to begin with since he basically got in the way of All Might's hero work. Izuku said it was solely on him that All Might wasted his energy and time, which he felt was what led to the slime villain being free and causing chaos. "I'm not done." When All Might said that, Izuku stopped dead in his apology and looked at his idol as he continued. "You told me you didn't have a power. So when I saw this quirkless boy try to save a life, it inspired me to act too." All Might said, and noticed how he now had the teenager's complete and undivided attention. There are stories about every hero, about how they became great. Most of them have one thing in common. Their bodies moved before they had a chance to think, almost on their own. Izuku wasn't sure, but for some reason, it felt like his heart was starting to hurt. A kind of pain he never felt before, and would later find the words to explain what it was. It was the pain that comes after having a part of you being shackled down with weights is finally freed. His idol was saying the words that he had been waiting his whole life to hear in earnest. And today, that's what happened to you. All Might watched as his words caused the teenager to start having tears fill his eyes and his body fall down to his knees. He knew he wasn't causing him any kind of pain. All Might knew he was saying exactly what this teenager had been waiting his whole life to hear, and decided to make it clear that indeed the words were spoken to him. "Young man, you too can become a hero." Chapter 3. New Allies, Old Allies. Izuku Midoriya had thought that the kind of training he had put himself through was difficult. It wasn't that he didn't have adequate reading and instruction materials or means of equipment, but keeping to a strict and rather rigid exercises training regime definitely required a focused mind just to start. That was what he thought was always the hardest part until 3 weeks ago, when All Might told him that he was deemed worthy of inheriting a power, a quirk that he said could be transferred from person to person. Izuku had no idea what was in store for him, nor the difference from being chosen worthy of a gift to being made ready to accept said gift. For the last 3 weeks at Dagoba Municipal Beach Park, All Might had Izuku cleaning up a rather large section of the beach as a means of training his body. While it was difficult, Izuku quickly learned several things about what All Might wanted him to do. The primary goal was to use time before the entrance exam to UA High to get in much better physical shape than he was now. All Might said that he had expected Izuku to be a skinny fanboy, but maybe it would work in his favor since he was more athletic than a typical junior high school student was. He detailed his plan as aim to pass American Dream plan, to push Izuku further in his training that even the teenager thought was possible. The secondary goal seemed to be a reminder of sorts. In cleaning up the beach, All Might wanted to instill the lesson that being a pro hero wasn't always about catching flashy villains. He said that in the early days of being a pro hero, there was times that they would do work for the community. Most considered the work to be too beneath them, but All Might said that being a hero also carried the dangers of allowing the celebrity status to go their heads. He said he had seen too many promising pro heroes fully commit themselves to being just that. But after a few victories or celebrated accomplishments, did they adopt the thinking that they were a better tier of pro heroes than others? Izuku understood that premise, but the one thing he had constantly on his mind, each time he came out to the beach to start working on removing the trash, was how some of the items actually made here. Izuku knew that the current of the ocean tended to carry some garbage to this from time to time, but even he knew there was no way the ocean washed up things like oil drums, multiple shoe lockers, and a 2-person delivery vehicle. The teenager was starting to suspect that All Might was bringing in some extra items when he wasn't looking. This beach may have been turned into some kind of unofficial dumping site, but no way would some of these items that Izuku moved wouldn't get the notice of the police. Garbage was one thing to find at the beach, like used food containers and the like, but there were whole appliances he was moving. Seriously, how did anyone not notice? After pushing that thought out of his mind, a kind of morning ritual of sorts before started his efforts to clean up the beach, Izuku noticed that All Might was surrounded by some fans despite the fact that sun hadn't even begun to rise in the distance. That wasn't too surprising since it was the weekend, and usually All Might spent more time with Izuku on the weekend in supervising the efforts of his training. It was rather inevitable that some of the people that walked by would notice a certain famous person had been spending more time in one location, And get the idea, said famous person would show up again. Izuku decided against asking All Might on what he wanted to start off with on the beach as part of his training. The teenager had figured out beforehand that when moving things it was best to use what he could carry with one arm first. Any more than that, and he knew he burned through his stamina too fast, and it'd make the rest of the exercise more challenging than it should be. All right, time to get started, Izuku thought to himself. An extra bit of encouragement in handling another long day of training garbage removal. The first pieces of garbage that Izuku moved were, unsurprisingly in his view, were several tires. They looked about the same size as all the ones he had moved over the last 3 weeks, and he wanted to gauge the progression of his strength overall since he had a clear memory of how much strength he used in the beginning. Izuku wasn't trying to show off or anything by when he able to carry 2 tires at once. It was a clear sign that he had been getting stronger, which did help his confidence since he did have a nagging thought that maybe all this hard work wasn't having positive results after 3 weeks. Izuku wasn't expecting to have a muscular form like All Might after all this time. He just wanted to know if this was proving to be worth it, and it was. After retrieving another set of tires and carrying both of them to the pickup site, Izuku was actually starting to feel a little more positive in regards to such hellish training. Hello? I know you're out there. Can I get a little help? That got Izuku's attention the moment he heard it. He looked around to see who might have been calling for help, but there was no one near him. Izuku could see that All Might was still conversing with his fans. That gave Izuku the thought that if All Might heard it, then he would have immediately moved to answer the call for help. The teenager did consider maybe he heard it wrong, like one of the fans yelled it out to get a video recording of All Might saying it catchphrase and showing his smile. But that thought was destroyed when he heard pounding coming from one of the bigger appliances. It looked like it was a fridge, maybe for a large home, or maybe even for a restaurant. Regardless, Izuku could see the door showing signs of impacts being made against it, and judging from the sounds and sight, it was being hit from the inside. Hello, someone in there? Izuku said, while walking up to the appliance. Yes, I'm in here, I'm stuck. The voice, though faint, called back, while banging more intently on the door from the inside. Hearing that someone was inside got Izuku to act. He first tried the handle of the door, but it broke off after he put in more effort than it was designed to handle. He then tried to wedge his fingertips in enough to help at least crack the door open enough, but that didn't work either. That was when he knew he needed a tool and saw some debris to the side that looked to be like metal pipes. Izuku had to basically rip one metal pipe out of the pile in order to use it, but he was glad to see that one of the ends was shaped like the tip of a crowbar. Hang on, gonna try something, Izuku yelled out to give reassurance to the person trapped inside. Please hurry. Been in here too long already. It took 3 strikes with the metal pole, but Izuku managed to wedge it just right so it created a crack within the door seal. Using it like a lever did Izuku push down on the metal pipe with all of this strength. It took a moment, but it was enough to cause the door to fling open loudly, and for Izuku to fall flat on his back, since he didn't brace his footing properly to keep such a thing from happening. But he got back on his feet as quickly as he could, and checked to see if the person that was inside the appliance needed any more help. The person that came out had one thing that distinctly stood out about them. Izuku had seen people with pink hair before, but seeing this shade of pink was rather new to him. Not only that, and after recognizing that it was a girl who looked to about his age, she had eyes that were definitely unique to saw the least. She also had a pair of rather odd, yet intricate-looking goggles on her head. Phew, thanks. Don't know how much longer I would have lasted in there, the girl said after getting out of the refrigerator. Guess it's true about the old saying of playing. Don't play around in junkyards or the junkyard will eat you. Huh? Izuku wasn't sure if the girl was being serious, or just making light of her previous situation. Besides, he never heard of that saying in his life before. Oh, just something my dad told me. Since I tend to go scrounging for parts, he always warned me that I was too carefree and didn't keep an eye on my surroundings. The pink-haired girl replied while dusting herself off and checking to see if she had any injuries or her clothes were torn anywhere. I always thought he was trying to be ironic when he said that, but now I can't say that anymore. Izuku was glad that the girl before him seemed to be safe, but he was slightly confused at the moment too. All Might had said that no one came to this beach for some time because of all the garbage, and if they did come, it certainly wasn't for the garbage, or at least that's what he thought. After she finished checking herself over and dusting herself off, the girl turned her attention to the one that saved her. Nothing about him seemed to stick out in her view. Not his messy greenish-black hair or the light freckles on his face, but his eyes, which were a shade of green she rarely saw, at least as a person's iris color. My name's May Hatsume. And who's the name of the one who got me out of that refrigerator trap? Midoriya. Izuku Midoriya. He couldn't help his voice from having a hint of nervousness in it. This was, to his memory, the first time he was actually talking to a girl. May gave Izuku a once-over, looking up and down his physical features. There was just something about him that she could swear screamed unique, but at the same time he was about as plain and average as he looked. Even with her quirk that allowed her to see several kilometers into the distance, was giving her the same contradictory information. While May was examining Izuku, he was doing so in return. The girl's eyes and headgear did stand out, but what created some more questions for him was when he saw what looked like a tool belt around her waist. Surely she didn't come here to repair some of these items, did she? Well, thanks again for the save. Wouldn't have happened if the fridge didn't slide on me, May said while returning her attention back to the appliance that she was recently trapped inside. Slide? How did it? Izuku hadn't really talked to a girl before, so it was only through his curiosity that he was making conversation. I was trying to get the motor that this fridge uses to keep things inside cool. One look at it, and I knew right away that the motor was in good shape. But how this fridge was built made it so that the motor itself was in and out of the main unit. May answered while making her way up to the top of the tilted-over refrigerator and began removing the screws that held the motor on top in place. I undid the parts that were connecting from inside. I must have shifted the weight around too much and made the door slam shut on me. Izuku watched as the pink-haired teenage girl worked fast in removing the last of the bolts and screws that held the motor in place. He watched as she placed both hands on each side of the motor and began to pull on it. Her first couple of tries ended in failure, but her third try, which had her fully standing on top of the tilted refrigerator, was a success. So much so that May lost her balance once the motor was freed from the appliance, and she fell backwards while letting out a surprise yelp. It would have been bad since the garbage behind her had a lot of solid shapes to them, and some of said shapes had some points as well. She definitely was going to injure herself the moment she landed on her back. But the hero that saved her from being imprisoned in the refrigerator managed to save her again by catching in time. May was confused that the pain she was expecting didn't happen when she felt herself no longer falling. Even more confused that she was now being carried in a bridal fashion with the motor still in her hands. She looked at the boy that caught her and realized that he was able to hold her and the motor's combined weight. His overall physique wasn't the kind that said he was strong, but the fact he was carrying her and the motor without much issue clearly said otherwise. You all right? Izuku asked before moving from the spot on the debris pile to a safe spot on the beach with the girl in his arms. When he was sure that they were clear from anything sharp or troublesome objects, Izuku set her down in a manner so that her feet touched the ground first. Yeah. May wasn't completely shocked at what happened. More like she finally figured out what it was about this person in front of her that seemed to tell her there was more to him than anyone would see at first glance. Gotta say, you are definitely stronger than you look. Izuku couldn't help but rub the back of his head and give a rather sheepish-looking smile for his initial response. Well, that's because I've been training to get stronger. And part of my training has been, I'm training at the same time I'm helping to clean up this beach. Hearing that answered a question that May had for some time. Oh, so you're doing it. I come here from time to time to see if there's any parts worth salvaging, and I've seen some of the debris being moved around or gone. I was wondering who was behind it all. But that's when another question entered May's mind as she took the backpack she had with her off and put the salvaged motor into it. The kind of question that she felt the need to ask. Wait, you're telling me you're the only one doing it? If you said you're helping to clean, why don't I see anyone else helping you now? May used her quirk to look up and down the beach and saw no one else actually doing anything that could be called the act of removing the debris. It wasn't completely out of reason that one person was doing all of this. But May remembered seeing some things that would require at least 2 people to move, and if she had to guess, the person who saved her twice was probably no older than she herself was. Do you have like some kind of super strength or matter-changing quirk? May asked while getting rather up close and personal to Izuku. A little too person for Izuku's sense of self, being that he never been this close to a girl before. Well you see Izuku's stuttering and mind freeze was getting the better of him. But it certainly didn't do anything to squash the curiosity that the girl in front of him was showing in her eyes. May definitely became more curious about this person with each passing second because of the idea that entered into her mind. A long shot, but it made a kind of sense if he was using a quirk in moving this garbage around, which could mean he was a pro hero, or at least someone who had a provisional license that allowed him to do work of this nature with the usage of his quirk. May's dream of inventing all kinds of gear that she called her super cute babies for pro heroes. Well, a dream of inventing everything that appeared in her imagination at least did require some steps for her to take, and one of them was securing a kind of backing once she got into UA High. She wasn't going to try for the entrance exam for the hero course, but for the support course with UA High, and what was required for passing that entrance exam was exceptional grades along with ingenuity and imagination. Like most of the high-profile pro heroes in Japan, having UA High as a reference for education and graduation almost guaranteed lucrative contracts with any of the support hero agencies in the country. May knew that once she had that on her resume, all the tech she imagined and dreamed up over the years would become a reality. Her ultimate goal was to secure a position on Island, because it was the premier place in all of the world for making new technology and exploring new frontiers of science. May was actually having a hard time keeping her giddiness in check, since it seemed like pure chance she ran into someone that might actually help her get one step close to what she wanted to achieve. Izuku took in a deep breath to steady himself, which was a challenge in of itself, before he properly responded to the girl that was staring so intently into his own eyes. I'm not actually using, my quirk for this. This is preparation for getting ready to take the entrance exam to UA High. Wow, really? You're going to apply to UA too? May wasn't disappointed when she heard Izuku say what he was actually doing. It was still an opportunity of sorts that could help her, and if she did it right, could help him as well. I'm applying to UA High too. What course are you getting ready for? The hero course. Actually, yeah. I plan to take in less than 10 months. May's giddiness practically exploded after hearing that. She remembered hearing from her teacher when she expressed, or rather yelled out her desire, to apply to the support course at UA High, that if anything she created personally while attending UA was used by a pro hero, practically guaranteed multiple options after graduation. And if that was true, maybe helping someone who was taking the entrance exam for the hero course with any of her super cute babies would help both of them stand out in many ways. That was what the logical argument was in May's mind at first. But her desire to invent and create was so strong within her that any outlet for said desire to be expressed was never a missed opportunity. What is your quirk? Super strength, since you're moving all of this heavy stuff around on your own. Matter manipulation? Some kind of variation of an emitter type, or maybe that really rare warp quirk I've heard about. Like you can look, touch or something, and you teleport an object to another location. May was firing off question after question so fast that Izuku's mind needed a moment to understand what was asked first, while May was 3 questions past that one. Izuku had to take a step back from the verbal assault, but May kept in step each time he took one back. Izuku didn't realize how many steps backwards he had taken until his left foot didn't have a stable purchase on the ground and made him lose his balance. Whatever it was caused him to fall backwards and react instinctively to grab onto anything in a futile attempt to keep himself from falling. One hand did grab something, but it wasn't enough to stop the fall. Both luckily and unluckily for Izuku, where he had fallen didn't have anything that might hurt him if he had landed on it. The lucky part of the fall was that whatever Izuku tripped on to fall over must have been buried under the sand, just enough that it wasn't visible enough to notice, but wasn't near any of the piles that Izuku was moving. The unlucky part for Izuku, at least in his view, was that he realized what his hand had grabbed onto to try and stop himself from falling was the shirt of the girl, and where his hand had ended up since he had caused said girl to fall right on top of him. His thought-processing ability came to a crashing halt when he noticed and felt where his hand was, so he didn't register the fact that the girl who he made to fall on top of him was still looking at him with the same intense curiosity she had when she asked all those previous questions. Is your quirk able to control sand or air? It's gotta be sand like that one pro hero, the sand hero, Snatch. I mean, how else can you move all this stuff on your own? May's mind was completely unaware or uncaring of the fact that Izuku's left hand was on her chest. Izuku's mind might have stayed in such a shutdown state if May remained on top of him, but instead she straightened herself so she was basically sitting on his lap. When she had her hand on his chest to help maintain her balance in taking a sitting position, May took note that Izuku definitely had a toned chest of sorts. His clothing seemed a little baggy, so she didn't have any hint before that he was more toned in the muscle aspect. Okay, your quirk has got to be some kind of super strength, or maybe a kind of energy application or transference. I've heard that most quirk require a strong physical body in order to be used properly and fully, and if you're using this as a kind of training method to strengthen your body, then said quirk is being underutilized or is currently underdeveloped, or May's mind ran through all the ideas of what kind of gear she could make, even though she didn't even get the answer as to what kind of quirk Izuku had. But she did become aware that while she was talking both to her and to Izuku, that he was just staring upwards with a blank look on his face. May looked up to see what might have gotten Izuku's attention, and when she saw nothing but blue skies and a few clouds with her eyesight quirk, she looked back down with her confusion evident on her face. She tilted her head to the side as an expression of her growing confusion. After a moment of contemplating past, May thought of something that she felt appropriate for the situation, since it sometimes worked whenever she made something, and it didn't turn on right away. With her right hand, May slapped Izuku across the face, and was pleased that the tried and true method of getting a piece of equipment to work by smacking it just right could also be applied to people. Huh? What? Izuku's mind was in the processes of rebooting, so it took a moment for him to realize what had happened and what was currently happening. Seeing the pink-haired girl sitting on top of him with a puzzled look on her face had all the memories rush right back to the forefront of his mind, including where his left hand had been. Izuku looked at his left hand, and then at May several times before he scrambled out from under her and took a kneeling apologetic position in front of her. "I am so sorry. Please forgive. I didn't meant to touch you there." With his head face down in the sand, Izuku didn't notice how his action puzzled May even more. Touch me where? You fell down and grabbed my shirt. I don't think my shirt has a mind that says it doesn't like being touched." May didn't recall anything Izuku had done to warrant such an apology. But then again, she didn't even notice what Izuku had accidentally done that he felt the need to apologize for. You're not mad?" Izuku had only heard that if someone touched someone else without their consent or permission, it usually ended with that said someone being angry. He had seen it before, where a fist fight of sorts ended up happening among the students at Aldera Junior High. He wasn't afraid to get hit by the girl since he felt it was justified. Izuku was more afraid of her grabbing one of the piles of debris around them and using it as means to bludgeon him to death. "Mad about what? You tripped, you fell, probably hit your head and got knocked out," May said with a hint of puzzlement in her voice while standing to her feet. "Gotta say, you seem a little strange right now, but hey, chalk it up to smacking the back of your head." Izuku watched as May walked back over to her backpack that had the salvaged motor in it, picked it up so she could put her arms through the straps. Izuku was still worried she might hit him for what he had done, accident or not, but cautiously got up from his spot on the ground while brushing off the excess sand that was clinging to him. When she was sure the backpack and its content were secured, May returned her attention back to Izuku. "So, honestly, what is your quirk?" Izuku wasn't all that good at lying or telling made-up stories. It was just how he was raised by his lone mother. But he also knew he couldn't tell this girl in front of him any more than what he had already told her. All Might had told him the secret behind his power, and Izuku knew that the very idea of a quirk can be transferred from person to person would change literally everything that people around the world. But all of that meant if she believed him to begin with, and Izuku remembered how he couldn't comprehend at first what he was told. And with the way the girl was staring at him, waiting for an answer, Izuku felt like he was in a very unfamiliar position, to say the least. It was unfamiliar enough that Izuku acted on the first instinct he had and simply say what was in his mind. "My quirk ... it involves a shield." Izuku saw May's facial expression hint at a growing curiosity when he gave her that answer. It wasn't a lie exactly that he had told her, but he definitely felt that he needed to give her an explanation. "My quirk, it's connected to a shield I have. I can make it. Well, I can make it so it can bounce off of almost any solid surface. I don't have it with me right now, but the best visual example is like this," Izuku said while walking over to the edge of the beach with a stone in his hand. He threw the stone in a way that made it skip several times off the surface of the water before finally making a splash and sinking beneath the surface. May had a contemplating look on her face after seeing and hearing what Izuku showed her. Since there were so many types of quirks out there that could do virtually anything, it started to make sense in May's mind with all the information she had. "I get it. Your quirk is one of those union types," May said. Izuku was curious since despite all of his recorded research of quirks he did over the years, he was ashamed to admit that he never heard of quirks being classified as union types. May picked up on Izuku's unspoken question and explained the information she had. "It's a relatively new classification for quirks, so I'm not surprised you might not have heard about it. Such quirks usually are connected to the basic elements like fire, metal, air, wood, water, etc., but it's different than people who can create fire, metal, air, wood, water, and whatever else exists in nature. So the difference is one can create something and control it, while the other can only control it, but not create it. Not exactly. May replied while looking around to see if there was something she can use for a visual aid. Remember when Izuku said his quirk was connected to his shield? May ran over to a car's hubcap she saw and picked it up. Say this is your shield, May said with said item in hand. Now, there are some union-type quirks some people have that is like saying this is part of me, and no one else can control it but me. If someone had a magnetic quirk, or a means to levitate objects, they can't take control of your shield, because they are trying to take control of only a part of you. To take control of the shield, they would have to take control of every aspect of you, just in order to take the shield. May did a little frisbee toss with the hubcap so it could fly over to another pile. Now, had someone had the means to control metal or certain objects, they wouldn't be so easily able to take control of your shield, because another aspect of union quirks is the amount of space that it affects. Izuku processed the information and spoke what his mind formulated as a theory. So you're saying some union quirks affect a specific amount of area too? Like say if it was a radius around someone, anywhere between a meter and mile. And if someone who can control an element, then their control would be affected inside the radius. Exactly. Like if someone had a fire creating and/or controlling quirk. If that person was inside the area that a union quirk affects, then the person who can create or control fire would have their quirk either compromised or inert for a time. Izuku felt like he understood what May was telling him save for one piece of the information. Wait, wouldn't the term be more like area quirk than union quirk? I mean, union usually is a term for joining, and what you described doesn't really seem like the term fits properly. Actually, that's why separates the two kinds of quirk. Area quirks affect an area, but union quirks can also affect a person if the quirk they have is similar to the person who has the union quirk. Like using the person who has a fire quirk for the example. If a person has a union quirk, and it's also related to fire, then it's more than just possible that the person with just the fire quirk can actually be controlled by the person with the union quirk, so long as they are in the affected area. That information cleared things up for Izuku. His mind made the visual of a puppet and its strings. Anything that's within the string's reach becomes controllable like a puppet, and more than one puppet can be controlled at the same time. Izuku knew such an analogy was simplistic, but the way it was described seemed that said analogy was apartment. Hearing that from May definitely impressed Izuku, since he thought his fanboy hobby of collecting pro-hero data and their quirks covered a lot that most people didn't know about outside of pro-heroes and government agencies. But it also sparked Izuku's curiosity, since he was just told all this by a girl who was salvaging parts. He remembered her saying that she was applying to UA High as well, and if she had all this information already, did it mean he was lacking something that might be required to pass the entrance exam? Between his junior high school work and the physical training he was doing, it became an alarming idea in his mind that he missing something critical. Hatsume, was it? Izuku asked politely. You can call me May. The pink-haired girl replied with a smile on her face. Okay, May. You said you were applying to UA High as well. Izuku said, to which May responded with an energetic nod. Are you applying for the hero course? Me? Ha ha ha, nope. Not a chance, since I know I don't have what it takes to pass something that has a passing rate of less than 1%. May let out a couple of laughs along with her reply. Then why apply if not for the hero course? Izuku had the long-running thought that if anyone wanted to be a pro-hero, the only place worth going to for such a goal was UA High and nowhere else. Because UA High doesn't just offer the hero course, May said with confidence in her voice. She looked over to another pile of debris to rummage through while elaborating what she had said. There are many other high schools around the country that offer a hero course. There are several pro-heroes that are among the top 10 in the nation that didn't graduate from UA High, but that doesn't mean graduating from UA High is the same as graduating from any other high school in the nation. May inspected another piece of appliance she found. Looked to be a small TV or computer monitor, but whatever it was, it didn't pass May's inspection, so it was thrown to the side without any care. If you think about it, everyone in this world has dreams. Some are the same while most of them are different, and vice versa. Izuku wondered if what May had just said was meant to confuse him, or if she was actually sincere. May turned her attention to Izuku from the broken parts of appliances she was rummaging through and walked up to him. You said you're going to UA to take their hero course, right? Izuku nodded, trying to keep his composure since he felt uncomfortable at how close May was to him again. Well, what do all heroes have, or rather need? And don't just say quirks. May asked, but didn't wait for Izuku to give her an answer. They need support. Izuku's mind thought of all the example of pro heroes needing support and found how little of information he had in his own head. He thought that maybe the kind of support May was talking about was pro heroes having sidekicks, which wasn't uncommon at all. Izuku had heard of some pro hero agencies having more than a dozen sidekicks in their employ, so that would count as support, wouldn't it? But the more he thought about what May had said about heroes needing support, the more he realized she was talking about something else. To clarify, Izuku did ask May on what kind of support was she talking about. Reaching into one of her pocket, May pulled out a circular-shaped black color object and demonstrated what it could do by somehow making two smaller halves of it, and then tossing one piece at one random appliance and another at a different object. No sooner after she did that did the two random objects suddenly fly at each other and then crashed into each other halfway. To say Izuku was surprisingly impressed was an understatement. What May used was barely bigger than her hand, and yet it did something that almost seemed impossible. May had already walked up to where the two objects had collided together and managed to retrieve the item she had used to cause them to fly at each other. This little super cute baby of mine is a prototype for a capture device I'm working on. It creates a strong magnetic effect between the two parts that attracts to each other. As you saw, it's so strong that it can actually carry rather significant weight loads in almost an instant. May looked over the device to confirm something that was an issue with the device and wasn't surprised at all when she found it. Unfortunately, the charge that's needed to create such a strong magnetic attraction, so strong that the battery life for it wears out in less than 30 seconds. But still, Izuku looked at the device in May's hand with amazement. For something that small, being able to lift two things that are clearly heavy metal objects in an instant. Impressive cute little baby, isn't it? It's something I made last month, but I'll eventually figure out how to make a strong enough miniature power source for it so it lasts far longer than 30 seconds. May handed the device to Izuku while he was still examining it. Pro heroes are trained to be at their very best, but more often than not they come across something that isn't something they expect, even if they are taught to expect the unexpected. As not all pro heroes are the same, not all villains are the same as well. What can take down one type of villain may not work on another type. Plus, not all villains just use their quirks to commit crimes. To give the pro heroes the chance to counter anything a villain might throw at them, sometimes they need to use a support item. Taking back the device from Izuku, May tossed it up into the air like she was flipping a coin. This cute little baby of mine will be able to do all sorts of things once I make it even cuter. Just think. If a villain has a gun or can make or use metal weapons, one of these will rip them out of their hands and give the pro hero the chance to one-shot them with ease. Izuku nodded his head in agreement, but stopped when he realized what May had said earlier before that to him. Wait a minute. You made this a month ago. How? How you found me? Looking for some spare and usable parts from places like this. Izuku did a quick glance all around in a manner that said he was actually seeing something that was so obvious to someone else for the first time. You mean to say that whatever you find in garbage piles like this that are usable, you can use it to make stuff like that thing in your hand? May's smile was the only response Izuku got, but it spoke volumes all on its own. What could be considered the penultimate realization in regards to May Hatsume finally hit Izuku when the dots started connecting inside his head. Of all the trashed items he had seen and moved over these recent weeks, even he knew that if with the proper know-how in engineering and mechanics, some of these items could be restored enough to function like they did before, and if possible, repurposed for something else. Izuku knew, he wasn't sure how, but even he knew that a motor from a refrigerator would use to keep items cool if repaired and used in the same manner. If May could make something like that magnet out of spare parts that people throw away, what could she make if given solid materials and equipment? Once I get into UA High, I'll be able to go even further in designing and creating super cute babies like these. Until then. May's smile didn't leave her face as she went back to checking around to see if there was anything else she could use or salvage and repair. Izuku wasn't sure how, but he could tell that this girl was going to go far if she kept that attitude of hers. In a way, it kind of reminded him before he met All Might and was chosen to be his successor. Going through things most people don't give more than a single thought about with a drive towards a goal. Izuku was just about to get back to his training cleaning of the beach when he looked back at the two items that the magnet device that May had used earlier. A flash of inspiration hit him when he remembered how fast the two items flew at each other in response to the magnetic effect. The teenage boy practically ran up to the teenage girl and flat out asked her for more information about that magnetic device. She demonstrated questions like, was it one charge it could hold, or could be redesigned to hold multiple charges? No sooner did those questions get asked did May remember earlier why she was asking all those questions about Izuku's quirk. She also didn't realize that even though the magnetic device wasn't performing the way she had imagined it, she almost considered it a done project, and would move on to the next one she had already planned in her head. So can it be done? Izuku was about ready to smack himself upside the head when he realized how he had overlooked what could actually be a significant flaw in having a shield. Make it so this magnet can call your shield to you if you can't reach. No sweat. May's mind was already thinking of ways to modify the device to do what Izuku had just asked. She first envisioned a kind of belt buckle that Izuku could press that would call his shield to him, but scrapped that idea. She next imagined a kind of helmet or full body suit to wear. But when she looked down at the device in her hand, and then looked at Izuku's hands, did she get the perfect idea? For his part, Izuku was rather overjoyed that he had met someone like May, and she was more than willing to help him out with something despite having just met. Then he became something of a nervous wreck when May took his left hand and felt all around up to his elbow, and repeated the process with his right hand and elbow. What are you doing? Well, a shield is usually carried on the back or the arms of the person who's using it. May replied while mentally taking notes how Izuku's hands and arms felt to her. She was already in the mental process of building either magnetic gauntlets for both hands or magnetic forearm guards. Since you said your quirk can allow you to throw your shield, best to make it so my soon-to-be-made super cute little baby can fit on your arms. That way if you throw your shield, and if it goes off course, or you need to call it back to you quicker than you can reach for it, all you'll have to do is stick out your hand to call the shield to you. Izuku did his best to keep his face from turning flaming red as May examined each of his hands. He wasn't sure if his hands were that interesting to her, or if she was teasing him. He did, however, note that her own hands seemed to be softer than his own, or at least her fingers, since she was wearing a pair of looked like fingerless gloves. When May finished doing whatever it was that she was doing with his hands, did Izuku take in a breath of relief, only to freeze up immediately when he felt May's hands feeling his shoulder area and his entire back. May was taking all the mental notes she needed in designing a kind of harness that Izuku would wear to that secure his shield on his back. There was one more piece of information she needed before she fully committed herself to the plans she quickly made up in her mind. This shield of yours, what kind of metal and shape is it? Only when he felt May's hands off of his back did he loosen up, albeit just a bit, to answer her. It's a circular shape that's about 2.5 feet wide and weighs about 12 pounds. May said mostly to herself, while placing a finger under her chin in a kind of thinking pose. Okay, I got the perfect super cute baby in mind for what you need. Izuku could easily sense the excitement in May's voice. It was kind of infectious, but he wanted to ask one more practical question before she started. Before you start, May, what do you want in return? I mean, I'll gladly pay you if you want. May thought about what Izuku said, about what she asked for in return for her services. She didn't mind the idea of getting paid, but she decided against it. May decided to do a kind of quid pro quo deal with Izuku. Tell you what, in exchange for helping you to make your own personal super cute little baby, you can help me by testing out some of the super cute babies I've already made. Izuku wasn't sure if the deal May offered him was more dangerous than it seemed. There was a chill running up his spine when she made the offer, along with giving him a smile that seemed like May was just barely able to rein in her enthusiasm. Aside from the spine chill feeling, there was nothing else that seemed like the deal was anything else but fair overall. Deal. Izuku extended out his right hand, to which May accepted with both, and shook his right hand vigorously. Awesome. May was genuinely happy that Izuku accepted the deal. Now I must be off. I got all these ideas in my head, and not a lot of time to turn them into reality. May was about to take off, but stopped just long enough to confirm as Izuku would return to this beach next week. The pink-haired teenager said that she could easily whip up in a day what Izuku had asked of her, but she wanted to bring some of the tech she wanted to test out with her as well. Izuku told her that for the foreseeable future, he'd keep coming back to the beach until he finished cleaning up as he was instructed to do. Great, see you next week, Zuzu, May said while waving goodbye. It's Izuku Midoriya, the teenage boy yelled out. That's what I said, Zuzu, the girl yelled back while still running towards her destination. Izuku didn't have a chance to call out again to try and correct May since she was already off the beach and out of his line of sight. He rubbed the back of his head at how the whole ordeal with May Hatsume ended. He knew it was weird on his part to ask who was basically a stranger to help him with something practically out of the blue. Then again, he recognized that he got caught up in the moment when he saw this girl was doing more with so much less than most people. That was something worthy of respect. Cute girl. Your girlfriend. Hearing that coming from behind shocked him out of his thoughts rather quickly. Mostly because he heard the tone of disappointment in the four-spoken words. Turning around to see All Might in his non-muscular form with his arms crossed and eyes narrowed at him definitely made him feel nervous on many levels. All Might let out a tired sigh after he noticed how nervous Izuku was becoming. In his view, the teenage boy looked about to be one step away from literally sweating bullets of water. He also realized that he couldn't be too disappointed with Izuku on account that it took longer than expected to deal with the fans that showed up at the beach. All Might knew he was going to have to rethink how continue to train Izuku without his status as the most popular pro hero interfering. Plus, since he had heard what the two teenagers mostly talked about, he felt maybe it was time to impart a few lessons he learned from his own personal experience. Relax, kid. I overheard a lot of what the two of you said, and I gotta say, what she said isn't far from the truth. Which part? Izuku asked his all-time favorite hero. About pro heroes needing support and support items. All Might said while walking over to Izuku. It's not an uncommon practice for any pro hero to have support items. Some use them sparingly, and some use a common one like a kind of handcuffs, or even a first aid kit. But there's another side that most don't think about until it's too late. Another side? What other side is there? For starters, any hero reinforcing their power with new gear can be a smart move. Just make sure you don't rely on it too much. All Might said while recalling some events that served as examples in his career as a pro hero. Some people aren't able to hold their own after losing an item. I've seen way too many heroes fall into that trap, and what the cost is as a result. All Might didn't want to give Izuku the wrong message that he shouldn't use a support item ever. But he also had a question that popped up into his mind while he overheard the conversation between the two. Now what's this about a shield? The moment All Might asked that question did Izuku realize that ever since that day, he never once told the man about the shield or anything even remotely related to it. Being asked somehow made Izuku feel like he had lied to All Might, to which the teenager openly apologized and told the man that he wasn't keeping anything secrets from him. All Might saw the look in Izuku's eyes and believed the boy, which was why his curiosity about the shield significantly increased when Izuku told All Might the details about how old the boy was when he found it, where he suspected it came from, and what he learned about it over the years. The current inheritor of One for All took in the information that Izuku had given him about the shield and mentally examined it. All Might had seen much when he traveled around the world in the past to practice and perfect his control over One for All, but nothing in his past experiences seemed to give an answer that he felt best fit this riddle he was told. A riddle he felt was worth solving, but how best to go about the first step? He didn't doubt Izuku on what the shield could do, but maybe the pink-haired girl was touching on to something when she explained union types of quirks to Izuku. Maybe it was possible that Izuku truly wasn't quirkless, that he was somehow misdiagnosed. If that was the case, then maybe it was best to learn once and for all if Izuku Midoriya had a quirk or not. All Might took a long look at the beach and noticed that Izuku was actually ahead of the schedule he had planned out for the teenager. One day could be afforded to do what All Might had planned. Izuku, tomorrow we're going to take the day off from training. All Might said, and then held up a hand to hold off the inevitable flood of questions Izuku was about to hit him. Your progress has been exceptional after these recent weeks, and judging by the state of the beach, you're ahead of schedule enough to where we can take at least one day off. But we'll be redoubling the efforts afterwards to make up for what is still going to be lost time. Understood? Yes, sir, Izuku replied. He did his best to show in his voice how strong his commitment was to follow the training All Might had prepared for him. All Might could tell that Izuku hadn't lost any of his drive towards the goal the man had set for him. If anything, it just further proved that Izuku was indeed a worthy successor, and All Might made the correct choice. There were other candidates that All Might had been presented with and considered. He even might have chosen one of them had he never met Izuku that day. Even though the process of choosing a successor was different than what All Might expected to be, what was expected of him at least was learning the answer to any riddle that comes their way regardless of how significant or insignificant they are. And right now, All Might's instincts were telling him the shield that Izuku spoke of was anything but insignificant. Tomorrow, meet back here around 5 am. We're going to go meet a friend of mine, and she'll tell us exactly what that shield is. All Might said, and then again raising his hand to stop the question that he knew Izuku already had in his mind. I'll tell you all about her tomorrow, since it will be something of a long drive just to reach her. Izuku nodded in response and later mentally tabled all the questions he had in his mind for later. Now, All Might said before going into his muscular form. It's time to get back to work. Yes, sir, Izuku replied before running back over to the debris pile where he had originally started working before rescuing May Hatsume. Seeing Izuku putting everything he had into moving the junked items off of the beach was indeed a solid testament to the boy's resolve. All Might wasn't ready to say he was proud of the boy just yet. It hadn't been a full month since he started, and training the body to be a suitable vessel for the power that one for all wasn't going to happen anytime soon. That, and no matter how hellish these months Izuku felt there, All Might knew the teenager would look back on these days as the easiest time ever in his life. UA only accepted the best, and even those that claimed to be the best crumbled under the pressure of the hero course. Those that didn't crumble became even better. Those were the kinds of hopes that All Might was placing on Izuku Midoriya's shoulders, whether the boy knew it or not. The following morning, Izuku met All Might at the entrance to the beach, but as was said yesterday, both got into All Might's car and began heading to the acquaintance he had told Izuku about. All Might said that the person they were going to meet was a retired pro hero named Valhalla. Her quirk, which was called Soul Sense, could allow her to essentially sense people, or rather their life energies, to such a degree she could connect to someone if she had an item they possessed at any point in their lives. She was great when it came to search and rescue missions, since she could find anyone almost half a world away. Izuku was impressed by the description of the person's quirk and several of the missions that All Might recounted where he was an active participant under her command. Izuku did ask what it was that led to such an accomplished pro hero to retire. All Might explained that while Valhalla's quirk allowed her to sense people's life energies, she would, as best as All Might was told for an explanation, feel the person's life energies at the same time. The downside to such an ability was the incredible emotional and mental taxing that came when Valhalla would sense the person perish before they were rescued. It was one thing to feel the residual energies of someone that had passed away regardless if it was very recent or years ago. It was quite another to feel it die out no matter if it happened slowly or fast. A part of Izuku actually felt bad for asking such a question, but All Might reassured him being a pro hero requires a strong will, and sometimes someone's will can only take so much before they break. He also said that while Valhalla wasn't an active pro hero, she had taken up a teaching position at a different high school to help train others in forest rescue techniques and tactics for their hero course. Still, hearing that one part about the will of the hero reminded Izuku of the moment when All Might told him that though he always shows a fearless smile, it ended up becoming a mask to hide all the fear that he did feel. Izuku didn't have completely romanticized dreams of becoming a pro hero. He knew there were going to be challenges that he would never see coming. But it was still a sobering reminder nonetheless. After about 3 hours of driving, the pair reached the destination, which was in a rural area. It wasn't as if they were in the middle of nowhere, but they were definitely outside of the nearest city limits. They had stopped in front of a gate to what looked like surrounded a rather large estate. Near the gate was an intercom system so someone could buzz and alert the people inside that they had visitors. But before All Might even got the chance to reach the button, a woman's voice sounded over the intercom. "Didn't expect you visit me today, All Might." All Might, in his muscular form, replied, "Well, what can I say, except I am here. And I brought along someone else for a visit as well." There was a laugh that could be heard on the other end of the intercom. "Well, I at least thank you for not dropping by like the last time. Took a while to fill in that impact crater you made." Sorry." Since the intercom had a camera system attached to it, All Might showed an apologetic gesture to the camera at the same time he spoke. "You're forgiven. But only for that time. I still haven't forgiven you for the other 5 times." All Might could only give a sheepish smile and a nervous look at the camera as a response. Mostly because he couldn't remember what other times Valhalla was talking about. Before All Might could glean what other times Valhalla might be talking about, he and Izuku heard a loud buzz sound and watched as the gate rolled open in front of them. While going up the driveway to the main house, Izuku was amazed by the sight of it all. Sure, he had seen some houses that had large front yards or backyards, but never did he see a house that alone took up what looked to be at least a city block. Wow, is she rich? I mean, how can she afford all of this? All Might, back in his normal form simply because his muscular form was a little too big for his car, and he had forgotten that he didn't adjust his seat when he transformed, said that Valhalla had actually spent some time abroad like he had. All Might wasn't sure when, but Valhalla started a business in the agricultural industry that developed the means of increasing the chances of bountiful harvests. She told him that since she had been so attuned to the nature of life energies, that she helped create better practices where farmlands could actually do better, even if the weather or the seasons worked against the farmers. Plus, said practices even help restore forest areas that were either damaged by natural events, such as forest fires or villains that get felt the need to wreck anything in sight. When the car pulled up to the front of the main house, Izuku asked if Valhalla knew his secret about his two different forms. All Might had to remind Izuku that she knew they had arrived before he could hit the buzzer on the intercom, so it pretty much already went without saying. The pair were greeted by a housekeeper who informed them that Valhalla was at her personal garden located to the east side of the property. All Might led the way since he knew where exactly on the east side of the property said garden was located. Izuku followed behind while keeping the shield covered in large piece of cloth so as to hide it from at least plain sight. As they walked, All Might decided to inform Izuku a few more tips about when talking to her. He mostly pressed upon Izuku not to bring up anything about her former hero career, unless she did so herself. After Izuku curiously asked why did All Might say that Valhalla was the kind of hero that didn't like the fame that came with her deeds. She was the kind of person that rather be doing what she wanted to do instead of being put on a pedestal and praised for a few noteworthy accomplishments. All Might even pointed out that she was the inspiration for the reason why he wanted Izuku to clean up the beach as part of his training. Izuku almost laughed after being told that. The laugh would have mostly directed at himself, since it was so obvious that as much as All Might inspired people in today's times, there had to be people that did the same kind of inspiration for All Might when he started out. When the garden came into view, Izuku noticed that one side was a kind of outdoor garden, and the other side was a greenhouse. What he could see in the outdoor part of the garden was definitely a pleasing sight of what looked to be an assortment of different plants and vegetables. Some of the plants and vegetables he was sure weren't really native to Japan, but they seemed to be thriving nonetheless. If this is what said practices that All Might had told him about could do, it made sense to Izuku that this woman would be rich as a result. So what brings the symbol of peace and justice to my home for a surprise visit? Izuku turned his head to see a slender-looking woman just exiting the greenhouse and walked up to them. She had raven dark-colored hair that reached down to her waist tied up into a ponytail, and was wearing a light green-looking blouse and skirt. Izuku's first initial view of the woman seemed to say she was a fair beauty, but that changed when he finally noticed her eyes when she took her black sunglasses off and revealed them to be pure white. The teenage boy made a kind of side mental note that first he met a girl with unique irises, and now he was meeting a woman that had no irises. He did his best to not try and stare, but it was weird since his mother always told him it was proper etiquette to look someone in the eye when you talked to them, and here was someone he actually couldn't look in the eye. I apologize for the surprise, but if it makes you feel any better, I was actually going to call you to talk to you about something else. I wanted to get some tips from you about something. All Might replied. Maybe. Depending on what you wanted to talk to me about. Both now and in the future. All Might leaned in and whispered something into the woman's ear that seemed to surprise her a little. Whatever was said to her was too faint for Izuku to hear clearly. I see. Well, we'll talk about that later. What is it that brings you here along with this strange one? Valhalla said while looking at Izuku. The gaze wasn't unnerving, but Izuku was still nervous anyways. All Might was about to say the reason, but realized he forgot a step in basic manners. My apologies. The strange one here is Izuku Midoriya. Izuku Midoriya, this is Valhalla. Please, call me Valeria. The woman said while extending a hand for Izuku to accept. It is a pleasure to meet you and allow us entry into your home. Izuku made sure that his voice didn't crack when he respectfully spoke the owner of said home. He even added a bow to help emphasize his show of genuine respect towards her. Quite the charmer and gentleman, isn't he, Tashinori? Valeria said, while giving a smirk to her friend. He seems to be many things. Apparently not only is he seem to be my one fan, but he's found something that, well, to put it simply, doesn't make a lot of sense. All Might said. Oh, and what might that be? Valeria asked, but already had a suspicion what it might be since it was rather too obvious to ignore even under a white cloth. All Might glanced around a bit of the area. Perhaps it'd be best to discuss this after a demonstration of sorts. He changed into his muscular form and turned to Izuku. May I? Izuku had given the rundown of what the shield could do, and did a small demonstration of its abilities before they had left to travel to Valhalla's home. It took a coup of shows for All Might to fully understand what he was seeing. Even in a society that tends to operate on the concept seeing is believing with a lot of things, All Might still had a hard time believing what he saw the shield could do. He already knew that Valeria would understand better his request after she saw the shield in action as well. Valeria watched as the teenager unwrapped the item and noticed right away the color scheme before she recognized what the item was. She thought the coloring and the design of it was inspired by All Might, since his current uniform definitely held similar aspects in comparison. With the shield in his hands, All Might took a couple steps away from the two while looking at all the nearby trees. After he made his decision, he told Valeria to keep her eyes fixated on the shield. Izuku looked back at Valhalla and could tell her attention was focused solely on the shield. Both of them watched as All Might ready himself for how much strength he was going to put behind his throw of the shield. He put in what he figured would be a proper show, which was at least 10%. All Might did suspect that if he put all he could into the throw, he might actually down several trees in the path of the shield, to say the least. Once he threw the shield, Izuku and Valhalla watched as the shield flew rather fast at one tree, but bounced off of it. Only Izuku was aware of what happened next, since saw out of the corner of his eye that Valhalla's expression changed from simple observation to confusion and surprise. Valeria's surprise was even expected by All Might, since it seemed to mirror his own when he saw the shield in action. All three sets of eyes watched as the shield bounced off the side of one tree and flew to another tree and bounced off of it, never once losing any momentum regardless of how many trees the shield bounced off of. All Might figured that Valeria was having the same kind of thought he had, that the shield, despite looking like it was made of metal, was actually some kind of rubber because of how it ricocheted off each tree. After it made a kind of misshapen circle around all three of them, did All Might catch the shield, but had to jump into the air a bit in order to do so. Once back on the ground and changed into his true form, All Might walked up to Valeria and offered the shield to her. "I'm guessing you might want to take a closer look at this somewhere a little more private," All Might said, while Valeria looked at the shield with wide eyes and an open mouth of surprise. She heard what was said, but only nodded in response. Both All Might and Izuku followed her as she walked back towards the house, while still examining the shield in her hands. Once inside, Valeria practically yelled out the question that she couldn't seem to answer on her own. What? What is this?" "Your guess is as good as mine, but I believe you have the better means of answering that question than I do," All Might said. Valeria didn't say anything, but made her way to a room in the house that she uses to both meditate and study. When all three were inside, Valeria told All Might to close the door behind them as she walked over to a table that was off to the side of the room itself. Once on the table, she began to use her quirk to see if there was anything she could sense from it that might give an answer or two to the hundreds of questions that was in her mind at the moment. Izuku noticed that Valhalla's eyes began to glow, which he took as a sign of her using her quirk. His curiosity got the better of him, and so he whispered to All Might on what the woman was doing. "As I said, her quirk allows her to sense people's life energies, even on an object. You could say it's like she can see the fingerprints left behind by a person, and some of the history of the person who possessed the object. The longer it was in their possession, the more history she can see." All Might whispered back so as to not disturb Valeria's concentration. Izuku nodded, while taking as many mental notes as he could on what was happening in front of him. Valeria's concentration on the object in front of her was giving off the strangest of sensations she had ever experienced. Without question, her quirk was sensing traces of life energies on the shield. One life energy in particular that was very distinct, and, if what she was sensing was accurate, had been with the shield for virtually all of its existence. That was the only thing that made sense to her. The other sensations she was getting from the shield caught her by complete surprise. Whenever Valeria activated her quirk, her field of vision changed in the way someone does when seeing through different elements of the electromagnetic spectrum. Like how someone sees the world in one way, and then sees the world through infrared to ultraviolet glasses. To her, this was how she was seeing the shield before her. In the general shape of the shield was someone's life energy that gave off a strong sense of duty, justice, and both the courage and will to stand up against overwhelming odds. It reminded her of All Might in his early days before becoming the symbol of peace and justice. But she knew clearly that whoever had this shield before wasn't All Might or any other pro-hero she had ever heard of. What she sensed next, what she saw next, confused her. On the surface, the shield looked to be one solid shape save for what was used to create its color scheme. But to Valeria, it looked like she was seeing the shield in three different ways overlapped on each other. One way of the shield felt to Valeria that it was man-made, like it was almost unnatural. The other two ways were both similar and different at the same time, which made no sense to Valeria. Both felt to her as though they were as ancient as the world itself, and yet, both felt they weren't any more part of the world as they were part of the other two. The only thing that made sense to her at the moment that this shield was made out of three kinds of metals, and if she was right, Neither one existed anywhere in the world. But that couldn't be correct in her mind because two of the metals were clearly old, while the general feel of the shield itself told her that it wasn't even 100 years old, and that feeling was unmistakable. The confusion in her mind was significant and almost made her miss something. Something that she regret focusing on so much to understand, because the moment her quirk touched it, a blinding flash hit her and physically sent her almost flying backwards. Luckily for Valhalla, All Might was quick enough to catch her in his muscular form. "Are you all right?" All Might asked, to which Valeria gave back a rather dizzy nod in reply. "What just happened?" "Never see something like that happen before when you used your quirk." "Actually, it did happen once before," Valhalla said while getting herself back to her feet. "Around the time my quirk first manifested, and I didn't have a lot of proper training in how to handle it. I learned that if an object has it within them, that I can actually see a moment of either the object's history to a person, or the person's moment where the object had the most significance in their lives. A hidden memory, if you will, between the person and the object." Valeria walked back to the table that the shield was still resting on. "It's very rare for it to happen, and I can count on one hand how many times I've experienced it. This shield now makes it at least 8 times I've come across a hidden memory within an object." Turning back to All Might, Valhalla gave a level look at All Might and Izuku before she flat out asked them where did they find the shield. Izuku told everything he knew personally with the shield, with All Might saying that today was literally the first day he himself ever laid eyes on it. No question that both were telling her the truth, but it frustrated her that none of the answers she was given by the two of them helped to even answer just one question the shield presented her. Valhalla took a moment to collect her thoughts and all the information she had at her at the moment before she addressed the two what she had learned. "When I saw this shield bounce off trees in a manner that seemed to defy the laws of physics, I made the assumption that someone's quirk affected it. Maybe somehow you did, young Midoriya. But now I can say that at least what this shield can do is not something you did or you, Toshinori. In fact, no one on this planet has done anything to this shield." Izuku long ago had the idea that the shield might have come from somewhere deep in space, but over time gave up on the idea since it seemed more logical that someone's quirk or even technical abilities might have created this shield instead. For All Might, it at least confirmed no quirk was applied to the shield, and by extension, it also meant Izuku didn't have a quirk either. Well, one answer found, but now 100 more questions from just that one answer alone. All Might thought to himself. All Might, back in his true form, asked Valeria if she could explain what she meant by saying about how no one on this planet had anything to do with the shield. "I'm no expert in metallurgy or physics, or even kept up with any new materials that are created. But I know without a doubt that what was used in the creation of this shield, the 3 distinct elements that combined within, neither of them exist, or at least there are 2 that shouldn't exist." What does that mean exactly? Izuku always found it strange when someone would say that something should not exist yet does, because in simple terms, if it doesn't exist, then it can't exist. Made more sense in storytelling, but not commenting on something in real life. Valeria picked up the shield from the table, still finding herself having trouble believing on how light it was, and walked over to the 2. "Without question, whatever makes up this shield, 2 of the 3 elements feel very ancient to me. I think the best example to describe it as that they feel far older than anything recorded in history. I don't know if they are older than the dinosaur bones on display in some of the museums around the world, but they are very, very old." "You said 2 elements," All Might said while eyeing the shield with a rather fresh set of eyes because of the information. "What's the third one?" "The only thing I can tell you is that, like the other 2, it is not something that was made on Earth. Even if it was, then it was made in the strictest of secrets. It's like there are 3 secrets in this object. Each individual secret is kept secret by the other 2 in such a way that they don't even know what the other secrets are. And to top it all off, I get the sense that this shield was made less than a century ago. The person who held this shield the longest held it at least 40 years to as long as 60 years. A riddle wrapped up in a puzzle that's covered by an enigma," All Might said, but mostly to himself. Both Izuku and All Might looked at the shield, trying to understand the questions that they were now given by Valhalla's inspection of it. And all of that doesn't answer the question of the hidden memory I saw within. Hearing Valhalla say that got both Izuku's and All Might's attention, since they both realized they had actually overlooked that fact. Valhalla thought about what she was going to do. Like with the other times she viewed hidden memories within an object, what she was considered doing was even more rare for her. Then again, she knew she wouldn't be able to adequately explain what she saw to the 2. It was a flash when she first saw the hidden memory, so there was no doubt there was a lot that she missed. So having 2 more sets of eyes might allow them to see something that could give them more answers. What I'm about to do is tricky, and I can't do it for very long. Maybe a minute at best, Valhalla said while raising the shield so it was in the middle of the 3 of them. Hold onto the shield with both hands and clear your minds of all stray thoughts. Do not think of anything else except the shield in your hands. Izuku and All Might as they were instructed. When she was sure they were ready, Valhalla activated her quirk and searched for the hidden memory she had seen before. As both All Might and Izuku watched Valhalla's eyes glow again, telling them she was using their quirk, they watched as the world around them turned to white, and then changed into a scene that was straight out of an old war movie. Izuku was caught completely off guard at the sounds of rifle fire and explosions. Even All Might was surprised when he instinctively tried to transform into his muscular form, and found that he couldn't. What's going on here? Did we get sent to an active battlefield? Izuku looked around to see exactly where he was, and where to run to so as to not get hit. It was clear that they were on a beach with an ocean to one side, and a steep-looking cliffside with gun placements scattered across the top of it on the opposite. And in between were soldiers running from boats that were landing on the shore trying to get as close as they could without getting either shot or hit with explosions. Calm yourself. This is only a memory, Valhalla said while looking around at the scene herself. A part of her was actually glad it was a memory since such a scene would have been too much for her to handle in real life. So many lives ending in an instant, and she was right in the middle of it. All Might let out a sigh of relief after hearing that. His first thought was that he somehow lost his powers, but mentally slapped himself upside the head, because he had to be reminded he was in a memory that wasn't his own. He then had his attention on the sight happening all around him. He immediately noticed something off about the soldiers that were storming the beach. Their equipment that they had on them seemed to be out of time as best as All Might could describe it. Valeria, can you tell exactly when all of this was taking place? It feels like what we're seeing is far back into the past, All Might asked while trying to see anything that also might give a reference to when exactly this memory happened. The general feel of this memory is saying it happened in the month of June in the year. Valeria focused on what she could to get the information. After a moment of concentration, there was a number that felt consistent to the memory. In the year 1944. Izuku heard what Valhalla said, but All Might was the one who reacted to the information. That can't be right. You said that the person who the shield the longest held it for at least 40 to 60 years. Did anyone else hold it? No. Valhalla had to yell out because an explosion went off nearby, which made a rather deafening sound that forced her to yell over. The only constant energy I feel coming from the shield is from one person. There are hints of others, but the amount of time for all of them combined doesn't even amount to a decade. All Might wanted to ask if Valhalla got the year wrong, but the more he watched the memory, the more it felt like it was accurate. That was when he realized something and turned his attention back to Izuku. The teenager hadn't really seen the worst that can happen in the world just yet, or what to expect when someone becomes a pro hero. Said teenager was now watching a memory in all its horrible glory of people dying in combat. Izuku was definitely shocked at the sight. Seeing people act like they were getting shot and killed was definitely different compared to what he was seeing now. He even saw one explosion happen on the beach, and could make out someone had been thrown up into the air as a result. It was a sight that made him sick to his stomach when he noticed that the person who had been thrown up into the air fell apart as he came crashing back down to the ground in a red haze. He turned his head away from the sight and put his hand over his mouth in an attempt to keep himself from throwing up when he saw something that instantly recognized. Look, Izuku yelled out, which made both Valhalla and All Might turn in the direction he pointed. There they saw a man in a red, blue, and white uniform leading a charge of men off one of the landing boats with the shield in his hands raised like a flag. Let's go. Time to kick these Nazi sons of bitches all the way back to Germany. The man yelled out as a battle cry running in front of the men. He was leading with his shield raised to deflect any incoming bullets being shot at him. The trio watched as he ran right through them, a sign that helped emphasize that they were still in a memory. All 3 of them noticed when he ran past them that the man with the shield was wearing a kind of helmet that had the English letter A on it, and that his uniform did bear a resemblance to All Might's current uniform with a white star on the chest and back of the upper part. The memory then started to fade, which was a sign that the minute was up in regards to Valhalla's quirk. When all of them recognized that they were out of the memory and back in the present, only Valeria didn't show signs of being hit with an intense wave of dizziness that Izuku and All Might showed. Sorry about that. I forgot that it's something of a side effect for taking people with me and seeing a hidden memory. I'm used to it, but first-timers, well. Valeria was glad that she had a couple of waste baskets in this particular room, since it wasn't entirely a pleasant sight seeing two people running for them, and then emptying the contents of their stomachs into said baskets. It was more of a distressing sight seeing All Might do so with red coloring than it was with the teenager. To help ease the smell that was going to fill the room, Valeria walked over to the windows in the room and opened them up all the way to help lessen the strength of the incoming stench. Once both had finished getting over their dizziness and drank some water to help ease the after effects, Izuku and All Might brought their attention back to what they had learned from the hidden memory they saw. Let's recap what we know. All Might said while sitting down on a chair to help keep any more bouts of queasiness under control in much the same way as Izuku was doing. We know that S.H.I.E.L.D. is made up of at least 3 elements that are completely unknown at least to the 3 of us. It belonged to someone that wore a kind of pro-hero uniform during either a major conflict or wartime, and the memory we all saw took place in the year 1944. Valeria and Izuku nodded to show they were in agreement with All Might's points. When he saw that they agreed, he moved on to some questions he personally had which were more or less answered. Izuku, when you told me what the shield could do, I made the assumption that maybe you did indeed have a quirk, and it was tied to the shield. That you were somehow misdiagnosed. Clearly, that assumption was wrong. Izuku nodded in agreement, since he even acknowledged that there was a small part of him that hoped he did have a quirk. Now he knew for absolute certainty that he didn't. It didn't sting as much as the day he was told he didn't have a quirk by that doctor, but at least he had the truth. All Might forgot that he hadn't told Valhalla that bit of information. For her part, Valhalla only gave the teenager a curious glance before returning her attention to Toshinori. I was also under the assumption that someone's quirk was affecting the shield, but now more than ever I know that was wrong. And if we are to take everything we now know about the shield as the absolute truth, then there are a lot of things that don't make sense. All Might continued while taking on a contemplative look. Agreed, Valhalla said. If memory serves me correctly, in the year 1944 was essentially the start of World War II. And if the shield is truly less than 100 years old, it contradicts the fact that World War II happened several hundred years ago. All Might said, which finished the thought Valhalla was speaking. There was a quiet moment in the room as all 3 individuals absorbed and processed the information they had. Izuku was the first to speak up about a question he had. Is it possible that the hidden memory we saw might have been a dream of some kind? Memories and dreams are different. Valeria began to explain since she had a similar thought in her mind, but discarded it. Dreams more often than not don't involve all 5 senses that a person has. It's exceptionally rare they do, but the odds are the same as if finding out how many people in a city share the same birth year, month, and day. Since memories do involve all 5 senses, which means they leave a stronger impression that can affect both the conscious mind and the subconscious mind. I'm not totally discounting the idea that what we saw was a dream, but until anything else appears that says otherwise, what we saw was a memory. Izuku found it rather comforting of sorts, when it seemed that what they saw was more of a memory than a dream. Even a teenager like him knew if someone dreamed of a scene of a battlefield where people were dying, either it was a nightmare to them, or they weren't all there in the head. Valeria, did you get a solid impression of the person who was the sole owner of the shield? All Might ask. I did. Strangely enough, it was the same kind of impression I get from you when we first met. Or should I say the impression you created when you first appeared on the scene all those years ago. Like he was also a symbol of peace and justice of his time. The answer to the question did erase some of the worry that All Might had in regards to the shield. His initial worry was when the time came that All Might would have to explain the full history of the Quirk One for all to Izuku and how it originally began. He thought that maybe the shield had a similar backstory, that it belonged to someone who could have been a villain. But that now seemed even more unlikely than before. In fact, it seemed to be a kind strange coincidence that made sense the more he thought about it. There were still reservations he had. That was never going to change any time soon in regards to the shield. But it seemed now in All Might's view that someone or something also recognized what was in Izuku Midoriya's heart, and gave him something that would be part of his journey to becoming a pro-hero. All Might changed into his muscular form, walked over to the shield, so as to pick it up and hand it over to Izuku. However this came to you, young Midoriya, it was meant for you and you alone. Of that I have no doubt. All Might said as he handed it back over to Izuku. I also have no doubt there are lessons to be learned from it, and those lessons will be for you and you alone. Treat it with respect and never forget. Understood. Yes, sir, Izuku said after accepting the shield back in his hands. All Might gave Izuku a thumbs up and his true fearless smile. He knew it wasn't his place to take, or to give the shield to Izuku. But at least he could remind the teenager that there was a meaning to the shield, and that he should never disrespect it. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got some personal matters to discuss with my friend. We'll be leaving soon afterwards. If you want, there's some fresh apples and oranges down in the kitchen. It'll help your stomach to have some soft, fresh fruit in it, Valeria said, while showing Izuku where to go in order to find said kitchen. After Izuku took off with the shield in tow, Valeria closed the doors again and turned her attention back to All Might, who had deflated from his muscular form. So, your chosen successor is also quirkless. They say fate isn't without a sense of irony, Toshinori, Valeria said, which made All Might actually look away in shame. That surprised the woman and fueled the question Toshinori was rather reluctant to answer. I almost didn't choose him to be my successor. I even told him that he couldn't be a hero without a quirk. That actually made Valeria annoyed with Toshinori when he said it. Maybe you better explain from the beginning. Toshinori actually winced at those words, and even felt incredibly uncomfortable under Valeria's gaze. It took about a minute or two to fully explain the history between himself and the teenager. After which Valeria shook her head in disbelief at the actions the man in front of her willingly chose to make. So, had you not seen the boy act like a hero while you couldn't, you would have still let him believe he couldn't be a hero. That about sum it up. Yeah. Toshinori knew he would always feel a sense of shame at his actions. Not that it wasn't undeserving, but still weighed heavily on him when he felt it. Valeria let out a tired sigh before she said something she knew Toshinori needed to hear. Nana Shimura was of a similar mind when she met you. If you hadn't done what you did to convince her that you were worthy to be the next inheritor, well, you certainly wouldn't be All Might, to say the least. The irony of it all isn't lost on me. I just couldn't believe I didn't see it since it was literally right in my face. Valeria walked up to Toshinori and took one of his hands into hers. One of the downsides to being a symbol that no one knows about. The expectations grow, as does the symbol created by person or people. Both grow until people always expect it, even under impossible circumstances, and become blind to everything else around them. I've heard that before, but in a different way. I don't regret turning myself into a symbol, but what I said to my master was true. I wanted to create a world where everyone can smile, free of worries and fear. And as I told you, it's an admirable goal, but no one can wholly do it on their own. Valeria kept herself collected since felt like she had this argument before with Toshinori, and like before, it would go nowhere but in an endless circle, which would ultimately annoy her to no end like every other previous times. And yeah, I do remember all the times that you said that you won't have to it forever, but after that fight with him, even you have to admit you're running a kind of gamble after waiting so long to find someone to succeed you. Nothing was said for a moment before Valeria told Toshinori to ask the question she knew he wanted to ask her. Has there been any signs of All for One? The question itself was almost part of an obsession in regards to both Toshinori and the quirk within him. But every time Toshinori asked her this, her mind instantly went back to the fight where Toshinori almost died, and how much it hurt her to see him such a state. But that memory was also connected to Toshinori's sidekick at the time, Sir Nightai, and how his quirk, which allowed him to see in someone's future, showed him something he was desperate to have from happening. She still remembered, as if it was yesterday, that both Toshinori and Nightai were arguing in the hallway of the hospital about what would happen if Toshinori continued on as All Might, and how Toshinori said that he couldn't stop being All Might since that meant ignoring the people that were calling out for any hero's help. When Sir Nightai said that in 6 or 7 years, All Might would face off against a villain that would kill him. It was a kind of revelation that was hard for all those that heard it to accept, because his predictions of the future were never wrong. While Sir Nightai had his reasons for wanting Toshinori to retire, Valeria's reasons were more personal since they were about Toshinori, and not All Might. It's been over 5 years. You defeated him. Even if he lived, you practically crippled him in that fight. That monster has been around since quirks first appeared, Toshinori said, while keeping his anger towards the villain in check. What it took to take him down made me realize that all this time later that he may be down, but he doesn't stay down. Not for long. Which is why you should have chosen a successor all those years ago. Valeria's voice again showed how annoyed she felt with Toshinori at the moment. Sir Nightai was correct that it may have been a rough time had you retired after that fight. But he was also correct that it was the better choice than continuing on with a body as badly damaged as yours. Valeria placed her hand over the area that was the center of the massive scar hiding underneath his shirt. You are so worried that All for One would return that you ignored your own health, and ignoring the smartest choice you could have made all those years ago. Seriously, what's better? A successor with at least 5 years of training in One for All, or a successor that will probably be lucky if he has at least a year? Toshinori looked away in shame when Valeria reminded him again of some of the choices he made in the past. She used both of her hands to make it so Toshinori would look directly at her. Even without irises, both could feel their gaze meeting the others. My reasons for retiring from being a pro hero are the same as yours. If I don't take care of myself, then how can I hope to take care of people, or worse, make a mistake that cost lives? Even without irises, Toshinori could tell that Valeria was on the verge of tears, and he knew what the source was for these tears. Toshinori reached up with his hands, so as to gently hold on to Valeria's hands that still held his face in place. Which is why I want you to come with me to UA High to teach. Izuku Midoriya can be taught to be better than I was. But as much as I can teach him, he needs to know more, and aside from the principal and one other member at UA High, no one else knows about One for All. Your own quirk training alone could help him faster understand, to make up for all the time anyone else had who was born with a quirk. That made Valeria's eyes widen, since she didn't even think about that particular idea at all. Toshinori easily had the most experience in how to use One for All, but the hero course at UA High was meant to teach much more than simple quirk training and refinement. She even remembered her time in high school, about how distinctly different her fellow students' quirks were, and how no one lesson managed to cover even the basics for everyone in the class. Everyone had to learn all there was to know about themselves as well as their fellow students. And then, well, maybe we can. Valeria took her hands away from Toshinori's face, took a couple of steps back, and turned her back to him. The act did catch Toshinori by surprise, but he didn't push the matter, since Valeria's acts was a reminder that there was a time and place for that particular discussion, and today wasn't it. She was quiet for a moment because she was thinking over the offer to teach at UA High. She was already a teacher for a different high school, but it wasn't an uncommon practice for someone to take a teaching position at UA High practically out of the blue, because they were very picky in extending offers for teaching positions as they were for accepting students. What really made the decision for her was the idea that maybe this would defeat Sir Nightai's prediction of All Might's death. If she could help train the chosen successor, it might be enough to make up for lost time and help Izuku be prepared if and when All for One might return. Another factor that went in the positive aspect of her decision was maybe it would help mend some bridges between them all, including All Might and Sir Nighteye. Maybe even her and Toshinori. Turning back to Toshinori, she told him that she would accept the offer of a teaching position on only one condition. Toshinori first had a sense of curiosity as to what the condition might be, but it quickly changed over to dread when he noticed a smile appear on Valeria's face. A smile he had seen a few times before, and remembered how much trouble it meant for anyone in which the smile was directed towards. I'll only accept a teaching position on the condition that... Outside the house, a loud yell was clearly heard, caused all the birds that were nesting in the nearby trees to fly off in a panic because of the sound. Are you kidding me?